A huge crowd of the Walking Dead is chasing three men. They growl, overwhelm each other, reach out to the still alive with their cold and chilled, almost rotten fingers. They don't care if they bring down their fellows, because for them, only one thing is important: people with warm brains. One of the survivors of fear only manages to turn his head in order to look his fear in the eyes, while the two continue to try to escape. Since the space between the houses is terribly narrow, and the bloodied zombies are only getting bigger. The guy screams loudly when his gaze bumps into such a huge crowd, which makes the businessman, whose head is covered with some kind of rag, even distracted, while the cook, judging by the clothes, is clearly in no hurry to stop. A loud mat comes out of a man's mouth before he accelerates sharply when a rotten and vile hand, which was missing several fingers, reaches for his leather jacket, wanting to either rip it off or pull the lively one in his direction. But then the guy abruptly turns sideways, instantly hitting the zombie on the arm, pushing that away from him with a loud clap, while the crowd from behind did not decrease for a second, but only increased. The dead man, it seems, only gets into a great rage from this immediately opening his mouth, in which a couple of dozen sharp and uneven fangs were visible, and then he growled loudly, rushing with renewed vigor towards the living. A person being struck by such an action only sweats more cold, while his eyes are still looking at the pursuer with the same horror. A groan of displeasure escapes from him, and then a desperate cry, "Why the hell is this game so realistic?" But immediately a man in a chef's jacket grabs him by the fabric of his t-shirt, pulling at himself and shouting that he should stop fighting and just start running, which made the guy even a little shocked. But he did not argue. After a certain amount of time, the whole trio struggles to run to some musty and abandoned garage. It seems that the zombies have gradually begun to lag behind them. The door inside opens with a loud bangs to a kick from the cook. People literally fall in, immediately closing the door back and leaning on it with their whole body, which God forbid no dead man decided to come to them. But they don't see that there is someone's body behind the dusty mountain of boxes. After such a run, they all exhale together immediately, starting to gasp for air as soon as they are in a more or less safe place, while the businessman is still pressing against the door, ready to fall at any moment. The guy, still breathing heavily and drenched in seventh sweat, opened some kind of blue window, similar to a map, before shushing his fellow sufferers and informs them that there are no zombies here, and it's not worth luring them anyway. Indeed, on this map, his position is marked with a white arrow and zombies with red dots that have spread throughout the nearest territory. While the three of them, frankly speaking, are staring at the blue game window, the body that previously lay completely motionless suddenly twitches its fingers as if coming to its senses. A circle is spinning over the bloody guy, while the system reports that the information download is completed. The whole body immediately begins to tremble as if in convulsions, and a strangled wheeze escapes from the mouth. A group of survivors reacts to this literally instantly, immediately jumping up and turning around in fear, screaming, and not understanding what kind of sound it was, and the dead body immediately rises on wobbly legs and with a crooked gait, walking in their direction from the mouth of a dead man. Some incomprehensible and inarticulate set of symbols and words are constantly coming from the cook notices with horror that they literally just said that there are no zombies here. What a rotten system. The unknown dead man is getting closer to them, opening his mouth, flashing bright scarlet eyes in their direction. The guy in the leather jacket immediately notices with displeasure that they immediately encountered a bug at launch. What a lame game. The purple-haired zombie continues to shine with his red, as if mechanical eyes again making some sounds, apparently trying to talk to them, but all to no avail. Frozen in fear, people just keep looking at him, and a blue status window pops up in front of him. Lin Yang, whose race was just an ordinary zombie, and all the other characteristic sticks in terms of health, hunger, and strength left much to be desired. With a numb look, he looks at all this. Did he get into the game? World immediately comes an unexpected notification for the player. Please take into account that you are going through the main mission. You cannot leave the game until the mission is completed. What the hell can't Lin get out of the game for a shift? And what kind of mission is this anyway? But immediately from the subsequent thoughts are distracted by instantly approaching steps from which it immediately becomes uncomfortable. The guy only raises his gaze in confusion before he encounters screaming people who are not just walking towards him, but literally running, waving everything they have, who is a guitar and who is a cast-iron cauldron. Jan only has time to think that he doesn't understand what they are doing at all before he gets everything he can from them. The businessman swings a knife, kitchen utensils, and even flies on the head, and a musical instrument now and then tries to hit in the ribs. He immediately begins to cover himself with his hands, shouting that, why are they attacking him? It's better to sit down and discuss everything. But all that comes out of him is indistinct, pitiful wheezing, while they continue beating, and the man in the leather jacket orders him to shut up altogether. And then Jan is distracted from the subsequent attacks as soon as something rings, and the blue window appears again in front of his eyes. It says that the final mission is to find out the truth about the outbreak of the virus and stop it. The guy immediately grabs his hair. How long will the main mission last? Customer service, he's not playing anymore. Let him in. Why did he have to be trapped at the very beginning of the game? But then the guitarist stops as soon as he notices this gesture urging everyone to wait. Do zombies know no one that you need to protect your head? Lin, with a happy smile and tears in his eyes, reaches out to them, already thinking with might and main that the self-proclaimed brothers have finally realized that he is not such a dead man at all like the others. But only in the eyes of living people he looks like a complete monster which yells at the whole garage. What a disgusting face. The businessman, squeezing his knife harder, says that if he understands everything correctly, then this zombie can be an elite monster, and their system simply has not been updated, therefore it has not registered it, and then, with a sharp movement, he pierces someone else's throat, cutting the carotid artery, which immediately begins to gush blood, and Jan himself only wheezes in surprise. The guy in the leather jacket immediately reports that there are a lot of valuables in elite monsters, so they will now kill zombies and get rich. And this phrase literally became a signal for the attacks of people to begin again and with renewed vigor. While Lin is covering himself with his hands, no, he's just an ordinary zombie. In his thoughts, he has to literally beg them to stop because it hurts. That's only then the realization comes to mind. Abruptly, it doesn't hurt. The dead man feels no pain at all. Does this mean that others like him have no feelings? Immediately, a blue status window pops up in front of your face. There it is reported that the feeling of pain is dulled, and the sensations from bodily injuries are weakened. He will only die if he severely injures his head. No wonder, then, that their attacks were ineffective. He has 2 more skills of this type. It turns out that zombies also have their advantages, and immediately, someone else's knife blade digs into his leg, distracting the guy from the subsequent reading. Jan immediately frowns and clenches his teeth if he doesn't fight back. Now, then these survivors will definitely cross all boundaries. A loud growl immediately bursts out of his throat, causing the attackers to instantly jump back and run to the door. The guitarist shouts that it was so loud that the zombies outside will definitely hear it, and the businessman echoes all of them to run. Otherwise, they will not be able to. Immediately, Jan smiles, with all sincerity, and asks them not to leave because you can talk, but from the outside, he looks like an ordinary grunting zombie who also reaches out to them with his hand. But the door immediately slams shut, and the trail of the trio of survivors disappears just as quickly, And it would seem that this is even better. Only at the same moment, a red window pops up in front of the dead man's face. This is a warning that says that the player must take into account that his hunger level has reached 50%. When the level is below 25%, he will lose consciousness until he catches enough prey to satisfy his hunger and raise the level to 40%, after which control of the body will return. The hero immediately panics, clutching his head. If he does not eat, he will lose consciousness. What kind of stupid setup is this? Why does he have to be a zombie at all? But immediately, his mood improves. When Lin can see his characteristics again, he has as many as 10 power points, and in such games, it is difficult for a simple player to earn even one. Even so, it would be better if he did not fall into the role of a zombie. When choosing the type of activity, there was no dead man, and that bastard just deceived him. Immediately, a memory comes to mind of how a whole crowd lined up behind red ribbons in front of a building on which it was written Zombie World. And from the side, I watched a perfectly healthy, normal young, who awkwardly confirms that there are somehow too many people here. He's upset, thinking that he can only watch others play, so it's better to leave. But immediately, a man in dark clothes runs into him, literally knocking the unfortunate guy off his feet, which is why he only has time to mumble an apology before he collides with someone else's gaze. The man under the hood looks ... not very, and then the stranger literally shoves a box with a disc and a helmet into his hands, urging him to take it all. The dazed Lin can only look at the front side of the box. This the zombie world, wait a minute. And as soon as he raises his head, he notices that the strange man simply disappeared from the field of view as if he had evaporated. Already in his own house, he starts the game, which is why its name and the start button appear on the monitor, while he himself looks at the helmet with interest. Well, you can try it for free, right? That is why he immediately pulls on a headdress. That's just that he immediately begins to squeak disgustingly, signaling that an unknown virus has struck something, and for some reason, the hero himself began to feel dizzy at that moment. And now, in reality, the dead man quietly sighs, reaching for the door. It's so stupid to play this game, but it's worth finding food first. That's just that one is immediately opened by zombies whose mouths are all covered in blood, and the remains of someone's flesh or clothes are in their teeth. The purple-haired man immediately covers his own lips with his palm, looking at this picture in shock. Did those guys get eaten? But the monsters are still not going to retreat from him, slowly advancing forward while Lin himself is pressed into some kind of rack, with his back shouting for them to take a closer look, because he is exactly the same zombie, not a person. Unfortunately, the undead only growls and everything moves towards him, stretching out their rotten and decrepit hands, crowding into the room. Hell, when the door locks, he'll be just as dead as the three of them. Ian must fight. That's why he slams his fist into someone else's face with all his stupidity, causing the rot to fall to the floor before he looks up and realizes that he is finished. A whole line of inhumans lined up in front, those with loud growls and grunts, rush in his direction, opening their disgusting mouths, but it turns out that they do not want to attack the guy, but the zombie, who fell immediately leaning on him and starting to gnaw into pieces while he was in mild shock at all. But apparently the instincts of self-defense act when necessary, because he immediately runs out of the open passage, rushing to run as far as possible. Zombies are too realistic, disgusting as. He progresses, he manages to stumble upon a huge building with the sign How Kaile Supermarket, which makes him immediately rush inside. According to the rules, the dead will attack first. Over time, there will be fewer and fewer people, and the combat capability will only increase when this happens. The zombies will starve. Therefore, they will attack representatives of their own species. After the whole snack, consisting of products that could be found inside the supermarket, he thinks that 10 points are required for development. He should improve the quality. But how to gain experience? New players of the human race can share information, and he Being a zombie, will have to find out everything himself. If he doesn't complete the mission, he won't be able to exit the game. What a nightmarish beginning. But immediately the rumbling of the stomach breaks out of my thoughts, and someone's voice mutters, "Hungry meat, still hungry." Immediately, another warning pops up that he should pay attention to the fact that his hunger level is now 30% when the level drops to 25%. He will lose consciousness until he catches enough prey to satisfy his hunger. The level will decrease until the hero consumes food or dies. Immediately, the guy grabs his head in panic, drooling. What's happening? He ate so much and no effect. What if the system interrupts all subsequent thoughts, informing him that he can only eat meat to satisfy his hunger? And where can I find him, I ask. But Jan abruptly throws a glance to the side when an unknown voice whispers there. Vision through the walls allows you to distinguish the silhouettes of wandering zombies, while the animal alter ego repeats everything over there, meat, eat it. Clutching his head, he literally forces himself to turn away from this sight. The Noi, why is the game so strange, too realistic? We need to find some loner, otherwise it will be too dangerous. But then the voice rumbles louder and louder, screaming meat bomb. He seems to be going completely crazy. Coming out from behind some shelving, still holding his head, he stumbles upon a completely single hunch silhouette, drooling more and more. He immediately realizes with an enthusiastic look that he needs to be taken. Lin instantly flies out of his small hiding place, rushing towards the barely walking undead, stretching out his palms. And then, as soon as he runs closer, he immediately grabs the man and bites the shoulder, tearing out part of the flesh with the fabric of the shirt. Under someone else's wheezing and growling, but the zombie immediately turns to him, shooting at the player with his scarlet eyes, still making incomprehensible sounds. Before grabbing his elbow and biting part of the flesh of his forearm, damn it, he bites. The purple-haired one immediately orders him to stop swinging his fist for a blow, which soon falls on the very skull of the monster. But all the phalanges and other bones seem to just crack and crumble inside from just one collision. With a loud roar, the undead only finally tears off the flesh, and the hero himself manages to jump back at this moment, clamping the wound and thinking that this is all very strange since the indicators of this bastard much higher than his own. Indeed, the blue window above the enemy shows that he has 15 points of strength and only 1 level of dexterity. Then it's not surprising that he didn't care about Ian's attempts to kill a stranger. Well, since he is not able to deal with him, then we must run. Why does he immediately rush forward, running away, but at some point turns to look back and freezes for a moment? So as expected, with level 1 agility, running is much slower than he thought. Indeed, the recent opponent is barely dragging himself in his direction, which makes a grin appear on his face. Lin turns to him, completely continuing to clamp the wound and smile. Let this dead man not blame him for being so slow, because he just wants meat. And now the guy will arrange a real feast for him. After some time in the kitchen, utensils section, the purple-haired man is breathing heavily, wiping sweat from his forehead. Everything was ready. Immediately, a familiar carcass looks out from behind the rack, while the player himself squeezes the knife harder. Just let him come. And as soon as the zombie comes closer at some point, at the same second, a knife blade flies into his skull, which makes the dead man in the shirt just stand still incomprehensibly. And Jan himself begins to throw all sorts of utensils at him. Pans, cleavers, pots, and much more are used while the enemy catches most of his face and body, growling discontentedly. Before a minute later, immediately goes into a rage, starting to shout loudly to the whole neighborhood, flashing scarlet eyes. And this is quite enough for the rest of the zombies to instantly perk up when they hear their brother, the hero, understands that he needs to finish as soon as possible, when the undead rushes to run at him with all their legs, trying either to tear him to shreds and eat him or just kill him. But he managed to prepare well because a stick was spread out between the shelves on which the cleavers were wound with the blade forward, which the non-human stumbled upon with his feet, immediately losing part of his lower limbs. Under the influence of gravity, he has to fall forward and on the floor as luck would have it. There are sharp buttons lying around which immediately dig into rotten flesh, causing the dead man to roar. And then Ian looms over him, who swings, "I don't understand where he came from," with an axe shouting that he should die. The zombie only looks up at him growling pityingly before his head flies off somewhere to the side. And the purple-haired man himself exhales softly and sits down, lowering the axe, while a lifeless body lies in front of him. Immediately, he calmly tears off a piece of flesh with one hand, bringing it to his face with disgust, reminding himself for greater confidence that this is all a game and meat is just data. Despite the fact that the player does not feel the smell, he still holds his nose and puts the rod in his mouth. It tastes worse than spoiled and smelly tofu. But he still swallows this lump before a second later, his face immediately lights up with unprecedented joy. What is this feeling? This type of stratification is just wonderful, and judging by the pop-up window, the level of hunger was thickened, reaching 100%. And after that, Lin notices with his peripheral vision another crowd of the dead that ran here because of the recent scream. It seems he thinks that zombies do not allow others to enjoy their food in peace. That is why grabbing the corpse by the leg, that sharp movement, throws it towards his half-brothers, shouting that they take it away, because this is their reward from him. And as soon as the undead are distracted, the boy himself runs away from them as far as possible into the depths of the supermarket. After that, he manages to get into some kind of room, similar to a restroom, into which he runs and closes the door behind him with a latch, and then literally falls on his fifth point tired. Immediately, another update pops up, which asks him to take into account the fact that he ate a representative of his species. That's why globalism was acquired, and a reward was given. So it's worth looking at the status window. Did he manage to get the skill? Indeed. A glutton appears, which makes it possible to inflict 10% more damage to its kind. If he had had it from the very beginning, he wouldn't have had to work so hard, but from killing his kind, or also gets experience points. Then you just need to use your brains and you won't have to wait so long for the level increase. And it would seem that there was a moment for rest, but then some sounds are heard outside the door, and Lin himself notices that it does not look like a zombie. And after that voices are heard, there is a lot of food and not enough zombies. Then what are we waiting for? Kill them faster and replenish supplies. We have almost completed the mission. We cannot make a mistake. Players again, the purple-haired man gets up from his seat, carefully opening the door and leaning out a little. It looks like they've gathered at the supermarket. But then his eyes widen in surprise as he looks at the newcomers. What, there's a damn gun in someone else's hand? Isn't the guy too strong? The man is standing around the corner from which he soon leans out, holding a gun in his hands and looking towards the dark corridor, trying to locate the zombies before he returns back to the whole crowd of survivors. He says that he will stay at the door and the rest should follow the plan and collect resources, and there is no need to make noise. They should also all meet here in exactly 10 minutes. The rest immediately let you know that they understood everything. After that, standing at the shelves, one girl calls out to her sister, showing a package of some food, but she replies that it's definitely not worth taking high-calorie food, while Jan is watching them, who literally stuck to the glass opposite the survivors, flashing his scarlet eyes. The brown-haired woman immediately seems upset by such an answer, which is why the sharply softened blonde replies that their bag has a limited volume, so you can only take one of this type. But even this causes her delight. The guy notices with irritation that they can at least eat snacks in order to replenish their energy reserves, and he himself has to eat only smelly zombies. Pressing harder against the glass and breathing, He continues to drill into someone else's back with his bright eyes, and the girl, it seems, having felt it, instantly freezes, as if rooted to the spot, not sure whether it seemed to her to live or not. At the same moment, she turns around in fright, but the walking dead immediately moves on, completely disappearing from sight. Already running past other shelves in a window frame, he freezes for a while as soon as he hears another conversation. The crowded guys are discussing something violently. One of them discontentedly asks if they really need to call a group of NPCs to share resources, to which he receives an answer from the second that his brother needs to think about the future because he himself is playing the beta version, and that soldier clearly has a secret mission. So they need to increase trust, and the man give them a gun is a reward for the task. The third immediately shouts that they will get rich instantly because this is a good weapon. Meanwhile, Ian himself thought about the fact that if the players have a gun at the initial stage, they will become too strong, and then how to survive zombies. It looks like only these three are players. They should not be given weapons at all. Immediately, a terrible scream is heard throughout the neighborhood, to which this trio and the soldier and the dead, along with him, react. They were girls who already looked tortured. The blonde embraces her sister and shouts to some people with knives so that they do not think to approach them. But right there, one of the main ones immediately slaps her, shouting for her to shut up. And if some bastards have attracted the attention of zombies, then he uses them as bait. The girl only glares at him angrily and hugs the trembling body of the brown-haired woman more tightly. The man swings again, asking who she thinks she is, that she dares to look at him that way. But immediately, a soldier grabs his wrist, ordering him to stop. He immediately wrings Tom's hand, grabbing his head and lowering it down. Doesn't he know how dangerous it is outside? Does he have anything in his head? All he knows is to create problems. At the same moment, the players run up shouting if everyone here has gone crazy, while the man releases the freak from his grip. The soldier immediately pulls a knife out of his belt, saying that now is not the time for this, especially since they can't wait here. So everyone better get ready to break through. Jan, hiding behind the shelves, just smiles contentedly. In addition to this military, no one has a normal weapon for longer, which means that he had a chance to win easily. And then a bell rings. The pop-up magnification again asks him to take into account that he has launched the side mission, the weakling that everyone is mocking, and the essence of it is that he has to ensure the safety of two girls in the store and kill those who threaten them. What not only is the guy a zombie, so he also has to save two non-player characters. This is some kind of mockery, no doubt. The reward for the mission is the trust of 2 female students plus 5. There may also be others according to the progress of the task. NPC trust. What is the use of this? But then Lin thinks about it. He remembers the player's recent phrase that for completing a soldier's mission, he can give them a gun, which means that there is still some sense in this trust. After a couple of minutes, Yude makes his way through the crowd of the rest of the dead, shouting to his brothers to let him pass, but it seems they don't really want to do it. And the closer they get, the more you can see the crowd of survivors who gathered in a circle and began to fight off the undead, then with an axe, then with knives. The purple-haired man himself notices that beginners know how to use the arrangements, which means that this soldier is a good leader. Well then, now he will check their combat capability. Changing his position, he pushes one of the zombies in the back, causing the inhuman to immediately lose his balance and fall forward, growling indignantly. Noticing him, the player immediately shouts beware before one sharp movement blows the enemy's head off his shoulders. The hero clocks, noticing that these players are quite capable, therefore it will be difficult for the low intellectual dead too. When he thanks for a moment if they work in a team, then Jan can also be a tank as long as he does not suffer much damage. That is why he rushes ahead of everyone, shouting something and articulate meaning by this that he will be able to protect everyone. Immediately, one of the guys tightens his grip on the knife, which he then throws forward. The blade's end is literally aimed at the very head of his half-brother, whom Lin watches with concern, before abruptly grabbing it with his hand. A growl comes out of him again, which implies that the bastard who threw him is supposed to know that it is dangerous to use the devices this way, and the undead who almost lost his head looks at his savior with surprise. The guy shouts out, urging everyone to look at their own block of zombies, which he saves from each flying object. While one of the survivors notices that he is behaving strangely enough and orders everyone to be much more careful. But immediately, some wild scream breaks out of the tank, while he, spreading his arms and legs, continues to catch weapons, even with his own body, which incredibly scares people. One of the guys immediately guesses is that the player is protecting monsters, while the soldier says that he is reasonable and should be dealt with first. The rest of the guys, apparently taking this as a real order, immediately rush in his direction, waving their weapons and ordering him to die. And even though he was found out, he manages to substitute the block with his hands. The sword has a limited lesson at all, and stones are not applied at all. And if the stupid bench press doesn't hurt his head, then he won't die. One of the attackers is so angry that Jan cannot be killed, but the guy, despite his friend's attempts to calm him down, rushes forward again with a knife, shouting that he does not believe in wishing the creature a speedy death, while the player continues to stand. And then a smile blooms on his face, bought at the soldier noticing this orders the idiot not to leave the building and immediately return back, but he doesn't care, and rushing ahead, the survivor only notices at the end that Lin himself successfully dodged. But the unfortunate guy stuck his knife into another zombie, literally colliding with his body, with which of course immediately devours the crowd. A notification immediately pops up that an enemy minor character has been successfully killed. +2. Experience has been obtained with a tense exhalation. The hero concludes that you should never get angry for no reason but one more, and he will be able to raise the level. The soldier, watching the devouring monsters, immediately orders everyone to move away, because the blood makes the opponent's attack stronger. The other two players immediately turn their tails between their legs, at least one whining that everything is too realistic, and he wants to get out of here as soon as possible, while the second tells him not to be a coward, because it will be more difficult. And it is at this moment that an axe is knocked out of the ladder's hands, driving him into a corner. And the zombie who attacked him only opens his mouth wider. And at the same moment, a soldier appears in front of the guy, who instantly kills the undead with a pistol, saving Puffy from death. He orders everyone to take their weapons and get up. Moreover, he has only one bullet left. Later he will come for him, so they should work together. And then the man fires the gun again, and that single bullet grazes the cheek of Jan, who even tried to dodge seriously what. He immediately turns around, starting to run in the opposite direction, and thank his brothers for the fact that now the soldier does not have a ranged weapon. That's just as luck would have it, the Inhumans rush at their fellow man, who has the same bullet in his brain, which is why Lin only shouts in amazement to a bunch of garbage, so that they don't eat their kind. Meanwhile, the man stands up and shouts that this is their chance and orders the countdown to begin. Making his way further through the crowd, he notices a lonely guy with a smile. Fortunately, they are busy with it, so the formation is broken. And while the loner is trying to fight off other zombies, the purple-haired one trudges to him from behind. Before sharply biting under someone else's scream, the experience goes +1. Immediately leaving the scene of the crime, he bypasses the zombies, crowding to a new snack, making his way to the rest of the group of survivors who are watching in horror. And as soon as he stretches out his hand, thinking that the soldier has been caught, the player immediately jumps up to him, offering his hand for a snack. Has this bastard gone crazy? The dead man immediately throws him aside to another undead who are not averse to eating again, and the guy himself yells that if they die, they will be able to be reborn, since only one player is needed to complete the mission, so it's worth protecting the military. And when Ian rushes at the man again, another player kicks some guy in the back, forcing him to literally fly into the purple head, one not giving him the opportunity to get closer to the leader. The two of them fall, and the hero, without a twinge of conscience, instantly pierces the survivor's neck, getting another experience point. At the same second, a warning pops up that there is little health left, and after death, it is impossible to be reborn, as well as it is impossible to exit the game. Does that mean he's going to die? What a stupid game. The soldier immediately begins to resent why they are protecting him, but the player simply asks to give him the gun. And while this verbal sparring is going on, Lin decides that now is the time to hide before they notice, so he goes somewhere, holding his shoulder, and at the same moment, a man with glasses appears behind him, who swings shouting that their boss died because of him, so he should die too. Immediately, a sharp and shiny blade appears in front of the face. All he can do is watch before blood splatters in all directions. Damn, what did he do wrong if he had to die? Here, Lin does not agree with this. The guy immediately clamps the knife blade between his palms, which was ready to pierce his head at any second, find out the truth about the outbreak of the virus and stop its spread, save two schoolgirls. The zombie abruptly snatches the sharp weapon from the man's paws, causing him to lean back dumbfounded. Yes, he put a bolt on all these things already. Normally taking the knife in his palm, he swings at the stunned survivor. He just wants to live. And immediately the blade passes with such force that it literally cuts the person standing in front of him in half, causing the blood to immediately splash in different directions, and the opponent, without even having time to squeak, falls dead. A window immediately pops out, notifying that another experience point has been received, and he himself falls to the 5th point, breathing heavily, and looking in amazement at the corpse lying next to him. Another notification from the system pops up again, which asks the player to pay attention to the fact that the conditions of evolution have been met and the HP scale has been fully restored. And now he needs to choose the direction of that very evolution. The body and wounds of the dead man begin to flicker with bright green lights, gradually enveloping his master and restoring all the wounds that he managed to get during all the skirmishes, and he himself blissfully exhales. Evolution is finally here. Soon, two directions pop up in front of him. Strength and Commander both look good as Jan notices wanting to poke at one thing at the same second. But the sharp blue window turns red, signaling a warning. During the process of evolution, he will temporarily lose consciousness, and the process itself takes only 10 minutes, so you should find a safe place for this case. Fortunately, two buttons are given to choose from, one with refusal and the other with continue. The purple-haired man looks at the red window in panic. Damn now. This evolution is tantamount to society. He needs to gain more experience and take a chance. He immediately starts poking at the window. The player's stats are balanced, but their strength is not as high as his. That is why, as long as he increases dexterity, he can safely not evolve. The guy goes to the VA band, still continuing to click on the plus sign about dexterity, whose points were already equal to 6. After a while, the dead man stands up in a stand, and his eyes burn with a red flame more than ever. And behind, like his own personification, the silhouette of a black panther looms well. What lets go? Immediately, like a bolt of lightning, he pushes off at right angles from every zombie he meets, which, as if on purpose, began to crowd again, grunting and still trudging after his fast brother, and Ian himself is shouting with might and mean that it looks like a full-fledged flight, while one of the players, who stayed to protect the soldier, is only twitching from the sight he saw, not understanding what it is at all. And the survivor, along with the military, watch in horror as this something runs at them like a battering ram, wanting either to finish them off on the spot or to demolish them completely. And in a sense, both options turned out to be correct, because Lin, because of such a huge speed, manages to swing his fists and hit a person in the face, muttering something, and articulate again. But if translated into human, then there was a simple shut up. The dumbfounded one only watches this picture for a few seconds before shouting to the whole neighborhood that this zombie has increased agility. And then at the same second, jumps into the air, waving his knife and calling on the beaten comrade to run as soon as possible, because the target of the dead man is himself. The player only has time to look up at the man before the blood starts gushing sharply, splashing up in a huge stream, but instead of depriving the undead of their heads or hearts, the blade of the knife, with all the doubt, pokes into someone else's palm, which just happened to be in danger, in time, piercing that through like some kind of toy, while the purple-haired man himself shouts something again, which means just in time. And the man who continues to stick the blade only deeper, impaling a pale hand, looks dumbfounded at the monster. The soldier shouts "damn," grabbing his second palm in order to resist the pressure of Jan, who, as if on purpose, pierced his upper limb, only more leaning forward and growling terribly, before at one moment twitches and bites his fangs into the forearm of a living man, tearing the flesh, completely causing the man to cry out painfully, not having managed to react properly to an unexpected attack. As soon as everything that is needed has been done, Lin rushes to run away towards the two girls who hid behind the column, while the soldier himself grabs a new wound and several zombies appear behind him, who actively begin to stretch out their rotten fingers to him. The blonde one immediately shouts out to his sister that he is coming as soon as he sees a reasonable dead man running, and behind him the remaining player and the soldier are going to, if not tear to shreds, then at least under brothers. The girls immediately fall to the floor, grabbing each other and starting to scream and fright when the hero with an open mouth sticks out to them again, trying to explain something with his grunting. But at some point, he just grabs the schoolgirls one by one, throwing them on his shoulders, to which the blonde screams indignantly. And the second one just almost cries, not knowing how to react to it. And only then when the guy continues to run with them. The brown-haired woman completely falls into decline. It seems having lost consciousness and part of her soul. And her sister does not stop starting to beat the savior on the leg, shouting that he immediately let them go, but the latter, it seems, does not care at all about it. He skips away as far as possible, while a player with glasses on his head is watching this awkward picture, noticing that zombies are very selective in eating, while one of those monsters standing next to him only grunts in response, seeming to agree with such an assumption, also watching this trio. And then they awkwardly exchange glances with the guy, as if a recent conversation could somehow really smooth out the situation and solve absolutely all the problems, but no the rest of. The undead also rushes after the survivor, causing him to run away somewhere deep, screaming for help, throwing his hands up, while the soldier sits near the wall, looking at the corpses in front of him in confusion. And already at this, Lin looks back, continuing to hold the two ladies on his shoulders, saying that the recent rival was very brave, but in any case he can easily be reborn. The purple-haired man runs up to some door, which he opens with one straight kick, which makes a loud bang seem to be heard throughout the supermarket, while the schoolgirls seem to have completely lost all hope that they will be able to escape from the grip. And then he throws them against some wall, from which they cry out, not really understanding what just happened, before the older one immediately grabs the younger one, squeezing her in her arms and trying to protect her in this way, squinting with an evil look at the zombie approaching them, who he dusts off his palms with might and main and thinks with a smile that the job is done. Unfortunately, they were not attacked at all while they were screaming, which means that the task is completed. That's why he immediately turns around and runs to other boxes, leaving the girls completely alone in the second half of some rundown and dusty utility room. Running behind the shelter, he sits down on the floor with a sense of accomplishment, immediately opening the blue window and thinking that now he will be able to evolve quite calmly. But immediately his face wrinkles in either a grimace of anger or disgust now. May this damn system fail. It's still the lowest race, and it turns out that Ian tried hard for this. He's biting the developer of this damn game to death. So the following is written under the directions. The main characteristics are increased in a moderate range. In all directions, all characteristics are higher than those of ordinary zombies. The direction of zombie mutant evolution has been greatly improved in terms of characteristics. New skills will be acquired depending on the degree of variation. The enraged guy immediately jumps up from his perch, starting to jump and growl loudly, which translates his game. "Let me in. I want to go home," while the girls hearing this immediately clung to each other, only stronger, and the younger one whimpered, calling her sister. Also, the next direction asks the player to be careful when choosing the direction of evolution for the first time, since the next ones will be subject to changes. Lin clutches his head in panic, immediately thinking about his choice. The strongman, of course, will increase his strength, and the commander fits the military strategy. Both directions have their advantages, so it is difficult to choose one. Oh, I don't care anymore. At the same second, he pokes at the first thing that comes to hand, the commander, while his body begins to envelop some strange glow, from which the next minute the player screams heart-rendingly as if he is being electrocuted, and the schoolgirls seem to be only more frightened, clearly not understanding what is happening to the zombies. Literally, after another couple of seconds, he falls weirdly back into place, and the subsequent notification asks him to pay attention to the fact that he decided to evolve into a zombie of the lowest level commander, and the evolution itself will begin in 10 seconds, so he should ensure his safety during this process. The guy only finds the strength to quietly mumble a reminder that the game did not forget to give him a reward for the task. The brown-haired woman immediately asks the blonde why the undead suddenly abruptly quieted down, to which the latter replies with tension that she does not know, but they clearly should be careful, because it definitely may not end well. That is why they decide to sit quietly and wait for at least something, or maybe even talk quietly, sitting opposite each other before the world darkens before the young man's eyes. After a certain amount of time, he begins to regain consciousness, gradually opening my eyes and seeing someone else's shoes in front of me. One of the schoolgirls asks the other if they have to do it all. Of course, the answer follows, while the vision becomes more and more distinct and rises higher, focusing on other people's knees, on which the knee socks were torn with might and main. Finally, he manages to raise his gaze enough to face other people's faces. The older one asks the other if she wants to wait until their new acquaintance wakes up and eats them, while the most holds some kind of metal tube, as if she could really save them. But immediately another NPC starts muttering, but he's turning his head towards the slowly waking up dead man before they both freeze. And she finally manages to say that their new acquaintance has woken up. Status windows immediately appear above them. The blonde is called She. You and her confidence has as many as 6 points. The second is called She-In, but she has 5 points. Both have weak status. The guy just clutches his head in confusion, not understanding why he can see the characteristics of the NPC. Is this his new skill? It's not easy for ordinary players to get such a skill you need to see. What else has changed, therefore? Ceasing to pay attention to schoolgirls, he immediately begins to poke at his own with a smile. All points have increased, and there are as many as 3 new skills, one of which is scanning. A commander whose racial skills can be improved with skill points has the following description: to change the intelligence of his race. You need to spend a small amount of stamina, actually. It's great for managing a zombie team, a powerful virus as it improves. It has more and more opportunities to infect people with a smile. The guy only thinks that scanning is really a thing with him. He will be able to see the characteristics of the players. I almost forgot about the most important thing, naturally. This is the reward for the completed task, which is displayed in the window like a huge box, hulking at it. A window of additional information immediately appears in front of it since the task was completed with a coefficient of 120%. And the trust of the two schoolgirls was increased by +5, and due to the fact that the player has exceeded the task, he receives additional rewards plus 1 skill point in addition. There are also improved skills. The rewards for an additional mission are pretty good, but it's still not worth running into such a thing anymore. Rare skill points should also be added to the newly developed ones, which is why he improves the commander by +1, which is why stamina is now spent to control the aimless movement of zombies for 5 seconds. 1 turned into 5, not bad. It seems it was the right decision. That is why soon he exhales in a relaxed manner, before a second later he turns to the sisters frozen with horror, saying that they should not be afraid because they are his task, but they do not understand their savior at all. And after that, he looks even more frightening, muttering something that translates as, "I'll cover you," but this only makes the schoolgirls tense up and grab each other more, babbling that it's very scary, and the older one puts the pipe forward at, "All," and at the same second, the guy runs out of the room, leaving the girls who do not understand anything behind, who only look after the retreating back. Ian awkwardly informs his sister that he seems to have left, while Yu only comes forward, saying that it is too dangerous here, and they need to find a way to escape. So after the elder asks if the younger blames her for bringing her to such a place. Of course, not the brown-haired woman even says that everything her sister does was right. Going out to the escalators, she asks if the zombies are visible, but the supermarket room turns out to be completely empty. And then we see why a guy is hiding behind one column. The captain's skill was activated, so all the undead left from the first floor to the second. Go ahead, at least that's the only way he can help them. And they support each other, at least someone would help him. But the next moment, Lin freezes in amazement, as if rooted to the spot, when he feels some kind of hostile and evil gaze of scarlet eyes behind him. It's a feeling something's wrong, and it's up there looking up. He immediately receives a new alert that asks him to pay attention to the fact that the player has entered the territory of another zombie lord. Before this undead is eliminated, or Young himself leaves this territory, this overlord will have a high degree of hostility towards him. Did the threat appear after the update, or what? He immediately rushes from his seat, trying to run in the other direction, away from the escalators, before a bright red warning flashes in front of his face again. He launched the long-term hidden mission overlord, like this Lord of the Dead. The guy can also designate his territory, but at the same time, others in other territories will be hostile towards him. Mission rewards are distributed in stages and determined according to the location outlined by the player himself. The zombie lord will randomly drop items. As soon as he saw the phrase about the award, he immediately darted back to the escalators like a wild boar, intending to go up in a moment. Once there, his foot touches some stone, and he tightens his grip on his knife, thinking that the level of the new target must be higher than his own, and he has a strong feeling of suppression. But as soon as he looks up, he faces a huge crowd of dead people. It's strange somehow. Why are they all standing here? Or maybe it's because of hierarchical suppression. Not because of him, it seems that the Lord is located on the 3rd floor. Raising his palm up, some blue impulses immediately begin to spread from it, while Lin himself thinks that it will probably be impossible to fight one-on-one. But if you don't let the zombies climb up, then he will have to go down to him, and he himself is already using them as a human shield. After a couple of minutes, he sits down on a part of the escalator, immediately opening the status window deciding to look at the scheme of the third floor, while all the undead crowded around him, looking with interest at the blue window. Gathering his strength, Ian jumps off the seat and tightens his grip on his sharp weapon, looking up. It's just for the reward word, let's go. The body is instinctively afraid, which can be judged by the trembling knees. What's going on? All for the reward. Climbing up the escalator, he immediately pinches his nose with his fingers, wincing when a very unpleasant smell begins to reach him. That's the real stench. But as soon as he goes further, he sees a huge silhouette ahead, illuminated in red. Is he there? There is only one zombie here, and this guy isn't much. And at the same moment, a status window pops up over the unknown. His race is an improved medium-level zombie, but the threat level is high, well, wow, and the dead man who had been quietly chewing flesh before turns his head, sharply flashing his bright scarlet eyes, which makes Lin only open his own in surprise, looking at the bully. The same monster, with a body covered with all sorts of pimples, which have become inflamed to such an extent that they are already covered with pus, holds someone's nod leg in his palm, slowly turning to the running hero. Noticing him, the zombie immediately throws the half-eaten flesh aside, seeing the food much more nutritious, while Ian himself is given the opportunity to examine someone else's lit-up blue status window. The name is unknown, and his race is a medium-level zombie with strength 30. Are they laughing at him? The guy himself has only 12 points of this characteristic, and also the fact that this bully considers him as a potential enemy does not make the situation better. Yes, and Trust has -5, but he has as much as 4 units less dexterity. The undead immediately opens its mouth wide and starts yelling so loudly and with such force that all this airflow almost completely knocks the player off his feet, which is why the latter only has to cover himself with his hands, trying to stand still, while all sorts of boards or beams fly by on his sides and a whole column of dust rises, and then this huge monster rushes at him, stretching out its paws and shouting food, clearly wanting to replace the recently interrupted meal, while the hero himself immediately starts rushing away, headlong, looking back at the man who kept trying to overtake him. Why is he so fast? Does this big guy really have less dexterity than him? But as the chase progresses, Lin's gaze stumbles upon a life-saving sign with a bright signed diner that hung from the ceiling. Considering that this is exactly his last chance for salvation, he jumps up and grabs the hanging sign with his hands, squeezing tightly, while he himself clamped the knife blade between his teeth and swung forward a little, trying to throw his legs into the air at least a little. And at this very moment, the same lord runs below, rushing like an abnormal, or maybe like an elephant, before it crashes into the nearest wall with all its stupidity, which instantly splits into splinters and stones scattering on different sides and spreading out with cracks all over its surface. The player, meanwhile, jumps down at all, pulling the knife out of clenched teeth. It was damn close. But fortunately, all the items were updated, so he was just very lucky. And while the bully is standing near the wall, which is all covered with cracks and remnants of his former past, the guy looks at his current opponent with great surprise and even shock, squeezing the handle of the sharp weapon harder. That's the power. And by the way, did he just say food? But after a second, the purple-haired man convinces himself that he just imagined it, yes, and it is necessary to end this as soon as possible, and he will receive a reward, which is why he himself rushes towards the zombies. And in the end, he jumps up at all, pushing off with his feet and swinging a knife for a subsequent blow, while the unknown only breathes heavily and looks into the void with his mouth open, flashing his scarlet eyes into the dilapidated butt. The end of the knife just knocks against someone else's skin without causing any damage, and the hero himself realizes with horror that the Lord is damn durable, and no matter how many blows he strikes, all this will be completely useless. And the bully reacts to this only by turning his head before at the same second yelling at him, "Die!" And with a sharp movement of his hand, he throws the annoying kid aside like some kind of nasty fly, which as luck would have it stuck to him. The body of the unfortunate immediately flies into the nearest glass, which causes the ladder to completely break into small fragments, also flying in different directions as a dilapidated wall recently did, while groaning escapes from in itself. Barely able to stand on his feet, he immediately coughs up blood, grabbing his cut hand and thinking that this big guy is too strong, which means that it will definitely not be possible to fill him up in the forehead. He himself does not know if the commander's skills can help at all now. The situation is getting worse and worse, and this lord himself instantly turns to face him and starts running ahead again, stretching his arms forward and continuing to growl or even groan, wanting to get it over with and get rid of the cheeky guy who interrupted his dinner. It seems completely desperate. Yen stretches out his palm forward, which immediately lights up bright blue, and he also shouts something, an articulate which translates as "stop." And immediately, as the aura gradually spreads to the entire body of its owner, it also envelops the huge carcass of the master, which makes him immediately stop dead. And from a recent gust of air, from running small clouds of dust spread throughout the room. And since the skill has no long-term effect, the hero, under the surprised gaze of a stranger, rushes headlong towards him again, before finally bending down and slipping under the opponent's feet, pulling out a knife, in time the blade of which cut through not only someone else's pant leg, but also part of the calf, which caused blood to immediately gush out of the incision, delivering Tom is uncomfortable. No one would obviously be happy about such an injury, and as soon as such a little prank was over, he immediately jumps to his feet, running away, holding his wounded arm and only thinking more about what to do as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the departed zombie only screams loudly, bleeding, before soon turning after the fleeing one. And the guy, like a real stuntman, runs to the escalators before jumping and rolling down the soft tapes of the device, and then jumps again, landing behind a crowd of dead people who were swarming in front of the very first lifting ladder. Deciding to take advantage of this very pandemonium, thinking that in this way it will help stop the fat guy, Lin directs his palm at the undead, which lights up again with a blue aura, which is instantly transferred to the peculiar brethren. He immediately shouts at them in the supposed language of the race, which translates as "Guys, block the stairs," while those like obedient dummies immediately move to carry out the order. Immediately, a dark silhouette of a bully appears at the top, in which only bright red dots in the shape of eyes are distinguished. He instantly opens his mouth, starting to shout loudly and viciously, while the dead are moving towards him, climbing the stairs, while a young man is watching all this cacophony, stunned by the fact that the big guy still came, but does not remove his hand, continuing to use his skill despite the fear that has appeared. The man's huge palm immediately grabs one of the unfortunate zombies by the head, literally grabbing the entire skull and squeezing hard in his grip. Yes, so much so that grabbing his shoulder, the Lord simply tears his head off his neck in an instant, still continuing to scream heart-rendingly and loudly, moving down the stairs, which makes the rest of the undead even scared when they see this picture. The mutant abruptly throws the bloody body into the crowd that gathered on the escalator, causing a couple of brothers to immediately fall on different sides, while others only open their mouths in horror, but some are still aggressively disposed towards the stranger under the influence of someone else's skill. It is these zombies who rush at the bully, grabbing his hands, then his legs, then his shoulders starting to bite in every possible way while he screams with might. And Maine not understanding what is happening, and the rivals are not decreasing. They continue to jump on top of him, tormenting the rotten flesh, which for them was like a tasty morsel. The hero, who watched with a smile before understands that it is necessary to act right now. That's why he jumps up and literally rushes forward over other people's heads, while the zombies, under the action of the skill, all go to their non-equal opponent, bringing the knife to strike. He makes quick and sharp attacks, cutting someone else's body like paper, cutting it on the chest, then on the shoulders and arms, then along the stomach and legs, while the monster himself roars with might, and Maine, not understanding how he should react and what exactly to do, since he is not even in being able to concentrate on a single stroke. And it is because of this that soon a huge and tortured body falls forward with a loud slap, crushing a couple of zombies and bleeding. While the player himself manages to jump aside, he thinks triumphantly that of course the bite acts only on the trunk, not on the limbs, but there is a chance. And at some point finally he manages to breathe calmly while his brothers pounce on the defeated enemy, groaning loudly and shouting at the same time, either trying to thank him for such a generous gift or something else, while helicopters flying towards the supermarket can be seen outside the window. The purple-haired man immediately tries to squeeze through the crowd, which began to bite into someone else's flesh and tear it apart at the same time, absorbing it as if there was nothing wrong with it, while Lin himself even thinks with some frustration that this man, it seems, could talk. He himself is more advanced, and his intelligence is clearly higher than the rest. So why does it still not work out? How is this even possible? But immediately there is a booming sound of an approaching propeller, which makes the player instantly distracted from everything that is possible, raising his head up and freezing in shock looking forward. Literally immediately, a notification pops up that asks him to pay attention to the fact that a special event is taking place in his region, the army. Over the next 48 hours, the military will invade the city. Their arrival is conditioned by the fulfillment of a certain task, holding his still wounded arm and standing in the middle of the crowd. The guy continues to look out the window in complete shock and starting to think about why the army is here at all, and in such numbers. What could have brought them to some abandoned supermarket which is simply teeming with monsters? Without them. Immediately the notification continues, trying to explain everything that is happening and what the further result may be. Interfering with this event will trigger various additional missions. He can get hints about his main mission, so he should treat this event accordingly. A huge smile reappears on his face finally, at least some clues to the main task. Of course, the guy will intervene. Another pop-up notification informs that Lin somehow launched a hidden mission in a special event patients. He should go to the hospital where those very patients are before the end of the event and find the trap doctor. The reward is just hints to the main task. For a moment, the youngster thinks, after reading everything, the army, the captured doctor, the hospital, it all sounds somehow not very simple, even terribly complicated. Not only will you have to face the soldiers for a certain time, but also save some doctor. And again, a new notification pops up, which reminds you that it's 9 o'clock in the evening. This means that the activity of zombies increases significantly at night, so he should find a safe place as soon as possible. The purple-haired man only blinks at this in confusion, before it gradually begins to reach him, and he instantly changes his face. Increased activity damage, and his luck would have it that furious red-eyed look is felt from behind again, from which all the blood inside freezes at the same second. The whole bitten and wounded bully jumps off the floor, scattering all the zombies that were thrown at him on different sides, while he runs to the hero again, shouting "Die," while the latter only has time to look at him, for which he then paid. The man tears off a piece of flesh on his shoulder, running further and further, growling, while Ian himself is only able to stare at his hand in complete shock. Even if zombies don't feel pain, it hurts anyway. Starting to tremble from such a fierce bite and damage to his body, the purple-haired man clenches his teeth and stretches the second limb forward, causing the palm to immediately light up again with a blue aura. But the skill is directed not at the stopped big guy, but at the surviving dead, who immediately begin attacking the opponent again as soon as the commander again shouted what was deciphered as "Stop him, bite him to death," and he immediately rushes to run, mentally calling himself a blockhead in the last fool, since he almost threw off his skates, simultaneously grabbing a sophisticated hand, while the monster behind yells everything but fights off small fellows, throwing them anywhere, while his gaze is directed exclusively at the kid. After a couple of minutes, he finds himself on the ground floor near some kind of internal store or pharmacy, asking the void if it is here, but of course no one answers. It would be necessary to treat the wounds, but now his stamina is not enough, and the commander's skill will not be used either. That's why we need to come up with another way to kill this monster. At least that's what Jan thinks, bandaging his sophisticated arm with bandages, creating a kind of splint and tying it around his neck. This fat man is fiercer at night, and ordinary zombies will be afraid of him. But this will be enough, because he will give him a sip of cocktail. He puts a rag in a bottle of alcohol, which he sets on fire, before standing near the doorway, waiting for someone to growl discontentedly and menacingly from the corridor. Just coming out of his little shelter, he thinks that he will finish this fat guy right here, because here he simply cannot turn around because of his huge size, which is why he will become an ideal target. And then, as if by the dictates of fate, the same monster appears from around the corner here he is. His face became even more disgusting, as it was all torn, bitten and bloody zombies, clearly inflicted most of the possible damage on him. But this did not soften the situation as the man continues to quietly growl, "Kill." Immediately, the bully, as if some demon possessed him, rushes down the corridor, grabbing at different surfaces for a greater opportunity for a push, while his red eyes sparkle viciously in the dark. The guy, squeezing the bottle of alcohol harder in his healthy hand, thinks only that the opponent still has plenty of health, judging by the speed at which this big guy moves at. Only this jerk met him, and at the same moment, the purple-haired man jumps out of the pharmacy's warehouse quickly and sharply, throwing forward a bottle with a homemade Molotov cocktail that flared up only brighter, which at the same moment breaks on the face of the bull with a ringing crack. The spilled alcohol from the burning napkin instantly begins to blaze with fire itself, burning the rotten flesh of the Lord, leaving numerous burns and reducing attempts to survive to a minimum. And the guy himself immediately jumps up, raising the knife to strike, while his own eyes sparkle no worse than others. Meanwhile, the opponent begins to scream, heart-rendingly, being struck by a bright flame, which was certainly not going to fade in the near future. The player says goodbye to him with a grin before the tip of the blade pierces someone else's head, and from such a huge wound immediately begins to spray blood with a fountain staining everything around it. After that, when the remnants of the undead burned down and the flame gradually faded by itself, Lin leaned against the wall, breathing heavily and sweating, damn it. He was tired to death, and at the same moment, some kind of bell rings notifying that the zombie lord has been defeated. A sharply pop-up notification asks him to pay attention to the fact that he has already managed to defeat the overlord in the "and now the territory belongs to Jan himself. Is he sure that he wants to take this place?" He immediately clicks confirm, deciding to see what advantages this has in general. After all, could it even be something bad? And in an instant, a bright green glow begins to envelop him, which was also after the first 10 experience points. Scored Ian only looks at everything that is happening with a slight shock, before he almost squeaks with happiness as soon as the status window pops up in front of his face. Damn it, he was given as much as 45 experience points. The Overlord's bonus is also impressive. It's just a bloodbath. 10 units were added to strength, and agility intelligence was increased by 1 point, and endurance increased by as much as 20 units. The status that was previously empty was also updated, but now it had several characteristics Midnighter, which increases the activity of zombies by 50, and Overlord, which increases the power only on its territory, and there are only some 5 points left until the next evolution. It's a pity, of course, that this bonus is limited and has at least some effects only on the territory of this very shopping centre, but the youngster does not even have time to think about it, as some incomprehensible sounds begin to be heard from the side, from which he immediately shudders and tries to determine their source, turning his head like a jerboa. A whole squad can be instantly seen in the window, which instantly heads inside in full armor and combat readiness, and behind them all armored vehicles also drive up on tires. The dumbfounded Lin can only be outraged, not understanding why so many soldiers not only turned out to be here, but also trying to get inside. For what did they also need some ammunition? Or was it all done for some other business? Once inside, one of the soldiers shouts about cleaning up the zombies, attracting the attention of the others who quickly rush into the mall, pointing their machine guns forward. All the men were dressed, as is typical of the real special forces, with all body armor and many others. They are definitely ready for this little mess, unlike the others. Yes, even the same survivors who had previously decided to go for supplies with a soldier. And as befits good hosts, zombies meet their guests at the very threshold, lining up in a huge, endless crowd, which immediately begins to scream in unison when bullets, with all the whistling, pierced through their bodies, instantly sending them to the next world. And the soldiers do not skimp on giving them a couple more dozens of similar lead bullets in the body or even in the forehead. The player, watching this horror from behind his saving corner, is drenched in seventh sweat, clenching his jaws in tension. It's strange he thinks the soldiers came in and broke loose. Could it have anything to do with his Overlord influence at all? But TVI, his gaze catches something much more terrifying. Not only has the whole army burst in here, but a huge car with a combat installation on the roof also begins to drive in, crushing all the dead in its path. Damn it. Too many people, and besides armored vehicles, a second car immediately drove it, and the military began to pick up the corpses, Doctor dragging them by the legs somewhere to the side, clearly not intending to bury them. Moreover, they took absolutely everyone, and indiscriminately, with a stricken face that expresses only shock and nothing more. Jan continues to stare at this terrible cacophony, as if at some point he could wake up and return home safely. But no. Everything is much more complicated and dangerous, being subjected to panic. He immediately thinks about whether they are going to deploy their entire base here by chance. If this is really the case, then everything is very, very bad. The soldiers mercilessly shot zombies one by one from machine guns and tank cannons. The ground near this territory was lined with foul-smelling blood. There was not a single free place where it would be possible to step without getting dirty. In this thick, liquid iron fences, made of barbed wire, were shifted carts with various kinds of supplies were transported. Screams and long moans came from everywhere. From all these lamentations, I wanted to fall into unconsciousness, closing my ears and eyes in order to leave this seething hell for the people here. Everything was a game. They didn't care that every murder committed blackens the heart and soul in the end. When they leave this world, they will be no better than these same zombies that mindlessly devour both their own kinsmen and a person not paying attention to the difference. The military planned to turn this place into its headquarters. Apparently, it was not part of the plans of these masters of strategy to inspect this territory cardinally. so it was not difficult for Lin Yang to hide behind the corner of one of the walls. The bodies were not lifted from the ground. They had to rot right here, filling the whole room with their stench. It was hard to bear for Lin Yang. This was another major problem he could not imagine, that there would be something more terrible than the former owner of the territory. The guy could only watch what was happening with indignation and once again keep his head down so as not to get hit, like those of his relatives who were already sprawled on the floor in agony. Meanwhile, people continued to tinker with a large metal apparatus filled with wires, levers, and switches. He weighed decently because 3 huge men brought him into the room. After a series of long fumbles, the device finally worked. The room was filled with cool light. A huge number of glass exits and entrances became visible. One of the privates began to report to the captain. He reported that the area was completely cleared of zombies, as if it occurred to them to check the building itself and not just its surroundings. They all hoped for hints from the system, excluding the possibility of any bugs in it. The servicemen chose this place because it was close to the location of the target, and the environment gave an advantage. It was the best shelter for them. Now, the shopping center was supposed to become a place of reception for employees who got into a difficult situation, having had injuries. Perhaps this can be called a place of medical examination of the military. Lin Yang frowned, realizing that his territory is not even the final destination, but a stop before getting to the hospital, which means it will simply be used without any benefit for himself. Even the smallest, he was not satisfied with this whole situation before. But now, he was even more disappointed. A system notification popped up in front of Lin Yang's eyes. Lin Yang, player, please note that your body is decomposing. He examined his wound in horror. She was already blackened, producing yellowish mucus, which smelled even worse on the zombie's body than it could on a human. It itched at the edges, but it didn't hurt, which is why the guy had already managed to forget that she even existed. It was necessary to leave the mall urgently to somehow solve this problem. A few more hours, and nothing would have to be solved. He looked around the room full of military men, whose uniforms were covered from head to toe with stains of blood and other bodily fluids. Lin Yang was still wondering how he could escape. There were patrolmen standing by each exit, guarding in case of zombie penetration. It's silly to assume that he could have left this room so easily. Even if he managed to run out through the doors, he still had to get to them, through dozens of people stationed here and there. His gaze caught on a short blonde guy. His hair was combed up, and he himself looked lazy and relaxed. Nothing like his colleagues. They could not relax even while sleeping, waiting for an attack. Around the clock, their shoulders were always tense, and their ears reacted to any suspicious and not very rustling. This guy was whistling to himself, looking around. A blue glowing plaque appeared above him on which the name Ian was indicated, before he and Lin Yang had never met before. Continuing to look suspiciously back and forth, he bent down to the corpse lying on the floor, starting to pick his pockets in a completely shameless way. He was definitely a player. They often cleaned up the bodies of mobs without even bothering to drag them at least somewhere away from the roads. Lin Yang realized that it was more likely that the player would go to the warehouse to find something useful for himself. Sometimes the players looked insanely like rats. They dragged other people's supplies while no one was paying attention. They attacked surreptitiously, getting into trusts. They smiled in the face just to achieve a good relationship, asked and asked for services again. Lin Yang rushed to the warehouse to disguise himself somehow. He began to rummage through boxes full of clothes, food, and useless things. Finally, he put on sunglasses, a black medical mask, a grayish cap, leather gloves, and a brown, loose trench coat. He began to climb on the cabinet with difficulty, clinging to the wooden shelves. His foot suddenly slipped, which is why he slammed it into one of these shelves, yelled automatically, Although he did not feel a drop of pain, he squatted down, somewhat resembling a cat, and began to wait for the appearance of Yin. He went into the warehouse, continuing to whistle the same tune to himself. Lin Yang jumped down immediately, taking out a knife and holding it to the player's neck. Lin Yang ordered him not to twitch and slowly approached the wall. He was shaking with fear, but fulfilled the request, calmly approached, and did not even resist when he was tied up. Tears of fear were streaming down his face, so that Ian would not shout anything once again. The zombie put some cloth in his mouth instead of a gag. Sitting him with his back to the wall, he looked truly pathetic. Lin Yang was secretly glad that he would finally be able to communicate with a living person. He had not been given this opportunity for a long time, because when they saw him, they immediately ran away or, on the contrary, directly at him, armed with weapons. Lin Yang quickly wrote something in his notebook with a pencil and unfolded it to Ian. The inscription consisted of a threat the poor guy shouldn't have shouted. Otherwise, Lin Yang threatened to take away all the supplies that he had been collecting so hard for a long time. The guy's face twisted in true horror. He looked up at his maniac with pitying eyes. Lin Yang started writing something again. The new inscription asked Yan to answer questions, but if the guy tried to call one of his friends, the zombie threatened to kill him. The player actively nodded, and therefore his mouth was finally freed from the rag, allowing him to moisten his tongue with saliva. The new plaque asked how Yin got his status. He said that when he finally decided on his role, the profession fell out completely by accident. Becoming a soldier of the second class was luck. Now Lin Yang asked about his current assignment, and the end needed to visit the hospital right now to get his next assignment. Suddenly, he looked straight ahead, exclaiming that he had received an alternative assignment. It offered to kill or cooperate with Lin Yang. It was the first time he had such a task, as he was really surprised. Until now, the quests were exclusively plot-based. He did not even suspect the existence of alternative ones, he said, with a smile on his face, that they are all players and there is no sense of competition here, because in any case, they will be able to become friends in reality when they have played enough. Only he didn't understand why Lin Yang didn't start talking in any way. A sign with a plus sign for trust was displayed above the player. Hagen thought about it and still decided that Lin Yang was not talking because of a bug, and therefore left the topic zombie. Immediately began to ponder the benefits of such cooperation. The presence of an ordinary speaking person was a good scenario. The hospital was after all part of Lin Yang's goals, and therefore he decided to accept the offer of cooperation to begin with. It was as necessary for Ian to cover the zombie while he was trying to get out of the shopping center building. Lin Yang still had no idea exactly how he would be able to do this, but first he had to agree to know that everything would definitely happen without mishaps. The soldier side, sadly thinking that Lin Yang's profession was probably at odds with the military. They went into the hall where everyone else was sitting. There was a lot of noise which distracted thoughts and incomprehensible directions. Lin Yang hid around the corner, and Ian moved towards the others, attracting attention. He raised his hand up and screamed that something serious had happened on the second floor. This guy turned out to be really a man of his word, so Lin Yang decided to think about a long-term cooperation with him. The soldiers moved towards the escalator, lined up in straight lines, ready for battle. They rose up insanely belligerently. Lin Yang, tilting the visor of his cap to himself, flew through the entire room, trying not to draw attention to himself and not making any noise once again. The zombie finally got out into the street and jumped on the fence to inspect the territory for the presence of relatives. He had only 5 experience points left. They would be enough to kill one zombie. However, the servicemen did a great job cleaning up absolutely everyone. The ground was littered with corpses. Not quite corpses. Lin Yang took off his mask and sunglasses. He was haunted by a slight shortness of breath caused by weakness of the body. Lin Yang needed to finish the search for a relative as soon as possible. Otherwise, cadaverous spots would appear on the body. His body was already turning brown. Suddenly, his skin felt cold. A sense of danger arose somewhere in the back of his mind. The temples began to throb unpleasantly from the pressure felt all over the body, enveloping the street. Lin Yang put the glasses in his inventory and headed towards the source of all this energy. There could be no mistake for sure there was a high-level monster somewhere there. Lin Yang walked through the streets filled with a cadaverous smell that ate into the mucous membrane, causing a headache. The closer he was to the right place, the more pressure he felt. It was like a game of hot and cold, only with feel worse better. It was the dead of night outside, and the shadows from the huge abandoned buildings did not allow the moon to illuminate the sky enough. Finally, Lin Yang walked up to the abandoned residential panel and lifted his head to inspect it. He was sure that this building was under the control of this high-ranking monster. Lin Yang didn't really want to challenge the Overlord for the second time in half a day, but circumstances forced him to. It was all too energy-consuming. No one could say that he would not get injured again, but in an attempt to get rid of the old one, Lin Yang only needed to kill a couple of low-ranking zombies and distract himself from all this with a pure soul. The Overlord's bonus was no longer available to him now in the absence of other ways to survive. Lin Yang took out a knife and ran into the building. The oppressive feeling grew and grew until it reached its maximum. On this floor, human skeletons were laid out in mountains, one on top of the other. Cobwebs were woven everywhere. The smell of disgusting rot and decay was in the air. He stepped on the floor, stepping on bones. Suddenly, he noticed that the corpses were dressed in hospital gowns and was horrified that they were patients again. Suddenly, something in the distance made a noise. A monster flew out from behind the door, knocking her off her feet. His body was covered with long bone spikes. He himself was a cadaverous grayish color. He was wearing the same hospital uniform as many corpses. The creature itself was a bone-eater, a new race that Lin Yang hasn't met yet. The monster growled and ran at the guy. He jumped convulsively to the wall. While his enemy flew further by inertia, he was already much slower than the fatty Lin Yang had met earlier. The guy ran behind the monster with a knife and swung for a blow. However, the weapon broke when it collided with the mutants. Armor, the man's steel skin skill was activated. His entire body became a solid weapon. Now, it was dangerous to approach. Lin Yang would simply die if he collided with these spikes. Coming here didn't seem like such a good idea anymore. My whole body was shaking, and my arms and legs no longer wanted to obey. The monster continued to swing its arms, hitting Lin Yang's body. He could not feel the pain, but he was fully aware of the horror of the situation. The guy was pressed against the wall, and now even the possibility of escape was excluded. The monster held out a palm in his direction with a long spike in the very center. Lin Yang hurried to pull out a knife from his inventory. However, the player did not have time to do anything. A metal spike flew right into his heart. He grimaced and got angry. Health tended to 0, and therefore did not please. Lin Yang angrily grabbed the thorn on the mutant's chest and pushed off from the wall and pushed him forward. The sharp body broke through the window glass, and they flew off the floor straight into the street. I could only hope for my own luck, because nothing else would have helped here. The adrenaline in his blood was off the scale. But Lin Yang was already on the verge of death, which meant there was absolutely nothing to lose. The spikes on the monster's body became even longer and dug into Lin Yang's entire body. He couldn't hold back a long cry. The guy swore to take the mutant with him to the grave. They fell to the ground with a characteristic rumble. A column of dust rose at the crash site. Lin Yang felt that his entire organs and bones had simply turned into a solid mess. Now he understood how people felt after falling from a high rise. But this understanding did not make it easier. I wanted to forget about what had happened and generally find myself in a warm bed somewhere in Shanghai. Because of the pain, he couldn't make a sound. Health really dropped by another dozen every second. He kicked off the mutant with his feet and got off the spikes. Lin Yong did not understand why the system did not request an update. After such a fall, the mutant could not survive. In any way, it looked extremely strange. He panicked for a couple of seconds, but when the guy rolled over on his back and lay down on the ground, the window floated right above him. The system reported that the experience points were all spent on healing wounds. This was the first notification from the system that pleased him. Lenyan couldn't even believe it, all the wounds on his body healed in a couple of moments now. The guy could easily get up. The system displayed the message again, that now it was about increasing both the territory and providing experience points of these 5 attribute points and 1 skill point now. It was necessary to choose the direction of evolution. There were sea carriers and bone eaters. To choose from, the advantages of a bone eater were obvious. He could easily fight alone, but the improvement in hardness was limited. During a meeting with the high-ranking, zombie problems will certainly arise, and the use of firearms will simply become impossible. The carrier of pestilence also retained the skills of a captain. In principle, everything would have worked out in favor of Lin Yang in this scenario. The guy finally made a choice. The scoreboard announced that evolution would begin in 10 minutes, and now it was necessary to be in a safe place. Lin Yang quickly began to look for something useful from the dead mutant. In the folds of his clothes, there was a diary, the entries of which read, "Today, several patients infected with rabies appeared in the hospital. When they arrived, they looked exhausted. As soon as someone attracts their attention, they immediately tried to bite. One bit me. The doctors don't know where they went. There are only a few nurses on duty in the inpatient department. It always seems to me that something is happening outside. Every day I see people in strange poses. It seems to me that I may be infected. The wound seems to be getting worse today. Is the 3rd day. Like crazy, people got to the hospital. The news said that a new virus has been detected. I think I'm infected. The wound seems to be getting worse today. Is the 3rd day. Experimenting on patients in hospitals was a big problem. Doctors in search of an ideal only brought out new diseases that no one could imagine how it was worth treating the player. Lin Yang should have paid attention to the fact that he was offered the task patient and its completion was 5%. As the hints for the task increased, the difficulty level decreased. He should have paid special attention to every clue Lin had not known before, that the hints would somehow affect the completion of the task, and therefore he was pleasantly surprised. He hoped to get to the hospital tomorrow and complete the task in a matter of minutes. Finally, it's time to evolve. Lin Yang moved to the shelter, continuing to say that he could not believe about such rewards for escaped patients. It was a real windfall after all. He sat in a dark room, surrounded by corpses that had decomposed a long time ago. The system window reappeared in front of him, and he clicked on one of the 2 options. Lin Yang decided to put all the points on pumping. The system reported that evolution was running. A sharp pain pierced his heart, and Lin Yang could not make a sound from the shock of pain. Every cell of the body was burning, as if pulsating. With a loud cry, he fell to his knees on the floor. Reality was blurring. The sounds around were felt as if through a veil of thickened water. He no longer felt his own body sinking into the depths of agony. A magical voice began to flash through his head, uttering words unknown to Lin Yang until the village. A spirit appeared before him, touching his face with its cold hands. These touches brought the guy a sense of peace. His eyelids became heavier, and he fell into a deep sleep. When Lin Yang opened his eyes, bright sunlight hit them. My head ached, either because of evolution or because of sunstroke. The guy stretched lazily and sat down more comfortably. This time, the evolution took much longer than the previous time. A tattoo resembling flames appeared on his cheek. Lin Yang examined the system's nameplate that had appeared. The level remained as low as before, but the increase in stats was astounding. The guy's gaze caught on the predator's nose skill. Lin Yang's irritation increased when he imagined that he would become like the many zombies he had met before he remembered how he had threatened Ian, feeling a slight remorse. The guy took out of his pocket all those accessories that helped him hide and pulled on himself. Lin Yang looked up at the chapel from where the sound of the clock striking began to be heard. It was already the 6th hour of the morning. He should have returned to the mall as soon as possible because the soldiers were going to move out very soon. However, his stomach suddenly rumbled, and Lin Yang realized the deplorable situation evolution expended any of the available energy resources, and therefore by its end, the body he was deprived even of fat reserves, it remained to survive only on the reserve that the body retained being in the sleep stage. In order not to expose himself to hunger, Lin Yang reluctantly approached the lying carcass. It smelled foul, and I wanted to move back to the former distance as soon as possible. After all, Lin Yang was not a fan of eating already rotting corpses from under corpses. There was no other way to cope with the hunger that had arisen. The guy raised the monster's hand and bit into the carcass. The bitterness of Rod immediately gathered in his mouth. Lin Yang kept hoping to get used to what was happening. It turned out poorly in the end. Sooner or later, he will leave this place and feel the pleasant taste of saju and ramen again. Lin Yang, restraining the urge to vomit, moved on. All the buildings looked about the same, and he had to look for the place he needed more by ear. Although the soldiers were not particularly stupid, they tried not to appear against the background of a deserted city. It was difficult to observe such a homeland. Everything gave the impression of something wrong, broken. The bodies around the shopping center were still lying unchanged. The composure and even partly callousness of these people could only be envied. Ignoring the corpses under their feet, they calmly lined up in columns for calculation. Although probably soldiers should not be different. Program-killing machines, always surrounded by corpses they killed, kill, and will kill, such as the fate of people who decided to associate themselves with the army of the Great People's Republic of China. Lin Yang hid behind one of the trucks belonging to people and looked out from there, trying to make out a familiar guy. But he still could not be seen. He was about to walk away so as not to get caught, but the right figure suddenly materialized among the rows. The boy himself began to spin, apparently in search of Lin Yang himself, but he did not come across him in any way. The zombie just rolled his eyes at the fact that none of us said anything to the appearance of the boy, as if it always had to be so. The soldier finally saw Lin Yang, and his eyes widened in childish delight. He began waving to his new allies, smiling cheerfully, a child indeed mean. While the senior of the fighters began to report to the commander, he announced that they were finally moving to the point. Lin Yang was indignant that he had to hide, although ordinary players literally found him in a short period of time without straining at all. It definitely could have been in some of the boys' existing skills, but it was impossible to say Lin Yang was pleased with the current situation. 10 easy players will be able to cover his movements. You won't even have to strain once again to get to the hospital. He followed the fighters, hiding behind cars, then behind the walls of buildings. The soldier couldn't figure out how Lin Yang was planning to cooperate with him if he was at such a great distance. It all looked quite strange, really, because Lin Yang was only pointing at something with gestures without uttering a sound. And Jana decided that she would definitely ask him about it when they got to the hospital. The hospital building resembled a haunted house. An ominous aura spread for many meters around the building, causing headaches and a feeling of pressure. This area seemed much more crippled here, and there were various broken cars, bicycles, and equipment lying around. There were no corpses in sight. A system message appeared in front of the players' faces, which notified that an increased level of danger was observed on the territory of the central hospital. The faces have both conveyed the full range of horror they could. Ian turned to Lin Yang in fear, but Lin Yang only gestured for him to move on. There was no time to turn around. Now the body was gripped by fear and the thirst for escape. But the mission required execution, which means the way is only forward Lin Yang's side, because he had originally planned to use Ian only as a human shield for some indefinite time. But here, they are one step away from possible death. And together, nevertheless, the situation turned out to be terrible. The system never simply notified about anything. In this case, the hospital was indeed a possible endpoint, because there could be zombies and mutants much stronger than those that Lin Yang had met before the guy materialized a knife in his hand, which lined up from pixels in his right hand. A zombie pounced on the soldiers from nowhere, and Yan recoiled in horror, feeling the force with which his heart was beating under his ribs. One of the soldiers shouted something and shot the zombies to pieces. However, Yen didn't hear anything anymore. The horror of what had happened engulfed his entire body. The guy was literally just a step away from his own death. The blood was throbbing in his temples and his limbs were cold. The air was filled with the smell of stinking blood. Zombies began to get out from all sides. It became unsafe for Lin Yang to be here. But he cared about something else. Shouldn't there have been zombies in such a dangerous place, much stronger than ordinary ones? Otherwise, what is the essence of its pseudo-danger? There was no way such pressure could have come from the pitiful bunch that had approached them. Everything that was happening was insanely strange. Hegan closed his eyes, activating his ability. A herd of goosebumps ran over his skin from what he saw. A huge number of zombies were approaching them without slowing down. Their rotten teeth were gnashing, announcing their imminent arrival. And Yan rushed to the drain, filling the air with screams. He was really quite cowardly for such games with immersion in the setting. Now he just wanted to escape far away from the zombies, ignoring the need to complete the task. The soldiers looked at Ian uncomprehendingly. Their eyes immediately widened in horror, seemingly emotionless. In their essence, we should not have been afraid, but the manufacturers clearly did not spare money for the production of this game, even in such seemingly details. Hundreds of zombies attacked only a dozen terrified soldiers. They retreated back, trying to shoot back from the people, enraged by their appearance. There were moans of pain and agony everywhere. The men mercilessly shot on pain of death. They could not be judged. Lin Yang cursed softly under his breath. Standing next to Yan, it would be worth worrying that the boy would notice his inanimate tone, but definitely not in such an atmosphere when it was impossible to catch even the sound of his own voice. Zombies were approaching from all sides in an unrealistically large number. However, it was not worth expecting anything else from the hospital, because here they collected all the infected in attempts to cure, which means there are a lot of corpses and more. And he had experienced all the stages of fear and horror every minute, because it was worth turning in the other direction as he again stumbled upon the rotting monsters with his eyes. Linian understood that human beings were much weaker than himself and possessed extraordinary abilities, and therefore they needed to be rescued immediately so that they would not end up badly in the hospital, no matter how ironic it might sound. The guy resolutely covered the distance between him and the building, and a few wide steps under the interested glances from men. The zombie abruptly opened the door, signaling to the servicemen that he had found a place to hide. Those, in any case, had not seen him before, and therefore would have taken him for an ordinary resident hiding from zombies and fierce somewhere in the basements. Due to the high level of losses, and for 10 people and 1 or 2, where the commander decided to retreat for the soldiers. Such behavior was definitely not something respectful and rather caused the sense of shame from themselves, but circumstances required such decisions because they were not able to keep such a number of zombies. Not everyone got out of the base, and because of the banal unavailability of equipment, They could not clean up the hospital just as easily as it was with the shopping centre that was occupied by them. The servicemen did not spare cartridges shooting back, which could lead to huge problems in the future. Lin Yang, he had no doubt that there was someone inside the central hospital that they clearly did not want to meet. In comparison, the current influx of zombies was just child's play. Lin Yong, in the node, ordered the servicemen to stay in place so that they would not be injured, and he slammed the door and left the room. People were terrified. They were clearly shocked by what had happened. They were all shouting at the guy to come back. But Lanyon completely ruthlessly rushed at the first zombie, taking off his head with one blow. In the end, the servicemen decided to ignore what was happening and hide behind the doors so as not to die. The commander gave the order for the soldiers to retreat and leave the guy alone. Lin Yang understood that it was not right for him to reveal his identity now, but there was nothing to do. He took off the accessories that had previously covered his face. Zombies surrounded him from all sides. Lin Yang exhaled. Trying to put his thoughts in order, he used the skill of controlling the zombies, forcing them to retreat and leave the area near the shelter. As long as the squad is sitting quietly in the store, it will be difficult for the zombies to find them after the control stops for good. Lin Yang didn't have as much stamina as he should have. He could only affect 800 objects simultaneously for 5 seconds, provided that they were of the same type. Now he was affecting at least 1,000 objects at the same time. So in 3 seconds, he spent almost all 30 endurance points, leaving 5 if someone else had appeared here now. Lin Yang simply wouldn't have taken it out. He was insanely exhausted, but it was already pleasing that his skills were not used in vain. Nothing threatened his future plan. Now all that remained was to find a place where you could recover before you had to use your abilities again. Such a low level of stats could not but annoying in such situations now indeed. The fact that the player and his author were like a man with a voodoo doll was felt more than ever. Lin Yang seems to have become his own voodoo doll. The guy was about to exhale with a calm soul when he felt a wild aura behind his back. He turned around abruptly and his face twisted in horror. The monster looked truly terrible. Tall, hunchbacked, and obviously heavy, his huge jaw was covered with dripping, viscous, smelly saliva. There were practically no clothes left. They were torn, and a folded paper was stored in the pocket on the chest. Lin Yong was frantically thinking about why the mutant was so hostile to him, even though they were of the same level. The chance of Lin Yang being caught was extremely small. Because his level was quite low, the guy got into a fighting pose, preparing to attack. Lin Yang's eyes caught on the name of the paper. It was a report on an inspection carried out in the building of the central hospital. Apparently it was a hospital employee, not a patient, as in all previous times. Lin Yang went straight to the mutant at full speed and pulled out a piece of paper from the caraman. The zombie reacted, but it was already quite late, because the guy was standing on the ground and smiling contentedly. He was already much closer to his goal than before. Surprisingly, the mutant did not react in any way to what happened. Moreover, he did not even move a step. Lin Yang couldn't help but be surprised by this, but he tried not to pay attention in the end. He had much more to do than just watch the fuel oil that does not move a meter. Lin Yang ran behind the wall to where those people who did not have time to hide in the store were located. The guy decided not to pay attention and pulled out a note that he had just received that. The system window that the document informed him about the same thing. The target was in the outpatient building. So much new information could not but please. Now, even the required floor was known, as was the name of the one who attacked him. Apparently this someone was Xioki, whose name the paper was signed with. Lin Yong smiled contentedly from the corner of his lips as he suddenly felt a sharp, cutting pain in the stomach area. The system window notified him of a low saturation level, only 27 points out of 100, with a value below 25 points. Lin Yang would lose control of his own body and would definitely eat one of his current allies. Such a low stat level could not but surprise. A few hours ago it was filled to the maximum. The guy shifted his gaze to the low-level swallows and grimaced. Apparently causing such hunger was a special mutant skill. Saturation began to decrease, sharply decreasing by 5 points every second. Line on has fallen into agony. Losing awareness of reality, his brain seemed to be falling into a shroud of madness. Saturation has decreased to 0. The 2 servicemen sitting behind the barrels looked happy. They were pleased with the current situation and the prospect of an early rescue. But it wasn't like that at all. Lin Yo's hungry body pounced on the men. Not caring about all those moral principles that the guy tried to maintain, the soldiers realized too late that something was wrong. Their bodies were torn apart, and the echo of their wailing echoed from the high walls of the buildings. Lin Yang only woke up when he was holding someone's hand in his palm. The guy shook in horror, retreating a few steps back. The system notified the guy that he had eaten human flesh. For the first time, his stamina was restored. The achievement capture of prey was obtained. The gluttony skill was significantly improved. He needed to check the values of the characteristics again. Lin Yang's consciousness clouded again, his stomach twisted with the realization of what had just happened. All the contents of the stomach poured out. My eyes watered. Lin Yang tried to convince himself that this was just a game, that everything would have been different in life, and he would never have done this. Everything that happened was really built by the settings of the game and the idiotic instincts of zombies. But nevertheless, the living flesh brought his body a sense of satisfaction. Action, as strange as it was, but his own body began to seem the most alive. The feeling of satisfaction from what had happened could not but frighten. But he didn't have time for regrets anymore. Of course, a repetition of what happened in the future could not be allowed. But what can you do? There was no way to return the lost lives, and therefore it remained to accept and really let go. Lin Yang leaned weakly against the wall of the store and opened the system window. It was available to him to copy the skills of the eaten creatures, which means that the skills of the bone eater had to remain somewhere in preservation. Just the system did not bother to notify about it when it was necessary. The guy's strength was already running out, which means they really needed to be protected. Copying skills were battened down quite a lot. But the main thing is that it was definitely worth it. Lin Yang resolutely appeared in front of a huge number of zombies preparing for an attack. The guy activated the Bone Eater skill in his right arm, was covered with thick spikes, shrouded in magical energy. He was ready to quickly and without delay deprive the mutant glutton of life in order to avenge the fact that he was forced to eat those people. Lin Yang pounced on the big man with a long cry, his eyes shining with red fire of hatred and bloodlusts. The monster recoiled in horror, feeling in his gut the imminent death. Lin Yang removed all those low-level zombies from the road in a few seconds, which prevented him from getting closer to the big guy. He also did not retreat so easily and activated his ability weak zombies, but in such large numbers, and even with activated hunger, foreshadowed trouble. They all rushed at Lin Yang with renewed vigor in an angry crowd. One of the zombies clung to his hand, but did not expect that in the next second the guy would turn it into a weapon of mass destruction. Lin Yang said, with the chuckle that Tom should have saved his head when the monster was already dead. All subsequent attackers expected the same outcome. It would seem that Lin Yang's entire body resembled a fishy, bony spine. Now he was left alone with the glutton. Lin Yang jumped up and swung for a punch when the big guy covered his head, but it wouldn't have worked on the guy in any way in. Fights with much more dangerous opponents, he learned a lot, and therefore hit right on target and punched the monster's skull with his new powers. It was like simply breaking glass. Now when all the other zombies pounced on the tortured body of their former leader, leaving him even the slightest opportunity to recover. Lin Yang calmly headed in the opposite direction to the crowd in the end. All these pathetic creatures were too influenced by instincts so much that it was impossible to imagine. The guy knocked insistently on the door on the other side. There were the sounds of raised guns that were pulled off the safety, ready to destroy anyone who popped in. However, Ian raised his palms in a conciliatory gesture. He was sure that Lin Yang was behind the door, which he hurried to inform his allies about. Each of them was surprised that this hitherto unknown guy had returned alive and was even relatively fine. He quickly ran up the stairs, followed immediately by the soldiers seized with curiosity. But the guy only handed them a note, saying that they should address all their questions to Yan and not disturb him for nothing. They immediately turned to the boy and began vying to ask dozens of questions. The most interesting one was the one in which they specified exactly where the guys met each other. The Yen begged in anguish, unable to understand why these NPCs were so real. Lin Yang pulled himself up irritably and hit the wall with his fist. His knuckles immediately began to bleed, staining all those bandages with which his hands were wrapped. The Yen, who quickly ran into the floor after him, looked at what was happening in horror. He did not understand anything at all. In his place, probably everyone would feel just as stupid. Lin Yong, on the other hand, could not understand what exactly went wrong in his life to put him in such a stupid position. It all seemed insanely unfair, because there was absolutely no difference between him and the other players. Everything was decided by the damn lot, which simply turned his current existence into hell. In order to somehow dilute the atmosphere of what is happening, Egan decided to introduce himself. He said that he is now at the 5th level, actually loves extreme sports. He kept referring to Lin Yong as a brother, and clearly showed a high degree of trust. The zombie was afraid that he would get depressed if he didn't start talking to someone here, so he quickly wrote an answer containing information that he had the 3rd level, he was a student, and was definitely fine right now. Lin Yong was interested in the question of why Ian decided to trust him then at the mall. The boy expertly raised his index finger and beamed. The reason was a skill called intuition. He has already been able to save Tom's life several times in this ruthless game. Now Ian himself has decided to ask a question after all. During these few days, he still could not understand why Lin Yang was so afraid to talk to him normally. The guy decided to miss all the details, but could not help but catch fire with interests. Will the Yan continue their cooperation if he finds out that he is a zombie? Will he look with the same burning and benevolent eyes? All these questions worried him extremely. However, in trying to write the word zombie, his hands stopped obeying him at all. He just simply couldn't write. It, in the end, could not make out anything written for him. Everything seemed to be hidden behind the blurring effect. Lin Yang frowned. He pulled the notebook back to him, and now he was already scribbling on it a question about what exactly was visible from what he had written whenever Lin Yang wrote any other word other than zombie. His hands didn't shake like that. Apparently the game decided to ban him from using this word. It looked comical. Lin Yong added the word stupid to the I and handed the notebook to Ian again. He was confused, asking if his parents were putting pressure on Lin Yong because of his studies and what was wrong with his health in general. Egan has played a lot of games, but this is the first time he has seen someone with such self-criticism. Lin Yang threw the notebook to the floor with all his might. All this irritated him insanely. The damn game didn't want anyone to know that he was a zombie funny. He awkwardly looked away, feeling out of place. Lin Yong began to undress so that his ally would at least understand by sight that he was facing a zombie. Ian closed his eyes. Crying out, it seemed strange to him, such behavior on the part of a friend. A sharp pain shot through Lin Yong's body, as if his limbs were paralyzed by an electric current. The zombie fell to the ground. Losing consciousness, the yen immediately rushed to his friend, worried about his well-being. For a moment, Lin Yang felt like he had fallen into a real hell. All his limbs and even his neck were bound either with a scarlet rope or with machine fabrics. Each of them had hundreds of mouths that gave the guy an order to be silent. Thousands of voices merged into one. There was a buzz in my ears. Lin Yang began to resist. He tried to get out of the vice, shouted that he was not obliged to obey, and all this was just his personal business. A cold laugh was heard from the depths of darkness. Its owner was smiling with a huge white-toothed smile, as if he were a real psycho. He was still ordering Lin Yang to be silent in the same chilling tone, coming very close. He doused the guy's face with hot, rotten breath. He grimaced in disgust. The unknown man ran his fingers over Lin Yang's chest and then dug his nails into the flesh, tearing out the heart. He leaned closer to Tom, close to his ear, and whispered the words that it was a warning. Lin Yang awoke in horror. His limbs were stinging insanely, reminding him of what had happened just recently. The zombie caught his breath and lifted his torso from the floor. Next to him, he saw a note folded in half, with a rounded handwriting and a fancy face from below. In it, Ian wrote the following: I had some business at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the time comes. Let's complete the task together. By the way, I told the guys that you are a mute retired Special Forces soldier. Lin Yang threw back his neck, leaning against the wall. It would be nice if everything was as described in the note. But unfortunately, he was just a zombie who was forced to hide. It was raining outside the broken window, gave moisture an opportunity to get inside the building. Its coolness was strikingly sobering. Or was it all the fault of the screams of those zombies that remained on the street? Soldiers entered the room, distracting Lin Yang. From his own thoughts, he looked at them with little pleasure. They asked him if Lin Yang would stay or follow them. The guy was somewhat confused, used by the treatment of him as an elder. But he was introduced as a Special Forces soldier, which means he had to get used to this kind of respect. Lin Yang handed them a notebook, informing them that he wanted to go further with the rest of the team. The squad was waiting for them below, and the young men came down. However, the rest of the soldiers reacted to what was happening with undisguised skepticism and only squinted at the zombies. Lin Yang did not expect anything else, because soldiers are not so easy to deceive. They calmly polished their rifles and kept shifting their eyes to the guy. Of course, they wanted to act together, and therefore the captain said that Lin Yang would have to act according to his rules, which means following every command that he would let go. The man handed the zombie a photo. It depicted a beautiful young girl. There was a pendant with 3 petals on her neck, green fasteners on her waist. She was dressed in a black uniform with a deep neckline and a white doctor's coat. Long, dark hair is gathered in 2 low buns. The commander informed Lin Yang that they were now heading to the central hospital to rescue a doctor named Shioki, who was just the same depicted in the photo. Lin Yang should have ensured the girl's safety if he met her. As it turned out on the note that was mentioned in the task, it was she who was mentioned. Recognition lit up Lin Yang's face. Lin Yang decided to share his findings with the captain by writing about it and attaching a note. Zombie understood that they were in the same boat now, and if he shared tips, it would result in a good exchange which would help increase trust. Trust really increased when the captain recognized Dr. Zio's handwriting with a pleased look. The soldiers decided to provide Lin Na with weapons. They asked him about what exactly he managed to master well in the service. Of course, they did not have large reserves, but at least they could provide something. He was handed a standard assault rifle. The system window immediately provided all the information on the subject of firearms, helping Lin Yang not to fail the mission. The guy understood that a zombie could not possibly have the skills to shoot firearms. After all, they did not have special mental abilities, which means there was no more sense from a rifle than from a child's train in the same situation. Lin Yong informed the captain that he was mainly engaged in hand-to-hand combat, and therefore just a few grenades would be enough for him. The captain scratched his head in confusion, deflating. He didn't care how agile Lin Yang was, but the rifle was no different from close combat when fighting zombies, and therefore the guy was simply obliged to take it. Growling sounds were heard from behind the door, which intensified with every second, and the sound of gnashing limbs against the door to the store was also connected to them. The soldiers stared in horror at the newly arrived zombies. The system notified Lin Yong that it was raining now. The noise of the water prevented the zombies from hearing, and therefore the guy needed to take these facts into account for his own safety. One of the privates asked the captain to go up to the top to look at something, because it looks like they will have to get out another way. The captain frowned and gave the order for everyone to follow him to the second floor. In the large panoramic windows, it was easy to see everything that was happening on the street. Even more zombies gathered under the windows of the buildings than before. The huge number of mutants appeared among them, which definitely did not exist before the soldiers stared in horror at what was happening. Lin Yang involuntarily pursed his lips. Apparently there was not only a low-level swallow, the captain's skill had a very bad effect on hungry zombies. It was impossible to clean up zombies from the roof. You had to go back to the building and find boards or something similar. People wanted to take advantage of the small distance between the roofs and get to the hospital using facades. Lin Chien couldn't help but be glad that he was a retired Special Forces soldier so far. This has been the best tactic, with the exception of a quick escape and a difficult-to-execute economy of forces. People began to slowly put their plan into action. It was necessary to move insanely quietly so as not to attract the attention of zombies to themselves, however. Because of the rain, they so did not hear anything. Zombies were not visible under the lion fabric, and therefore it became not so scary, which is why the soldiers acted very carefully. The rain was so heavy that the zombies could not catch not only the voices and conversations of the NPCs, but also their smells. The captain began to give orders again. He said that it was necessary to go to the hospital in a specific direction chosen by him. The soldier needed to pay attention to the ladder on the roof, while the others are engaged in the construction of the same. But the soldiers still could not understand why the door was broken. Suddenly, people caught the sound of gunshots. It was the departing soldier who fired towards the entrance to the store. Sawmy hands began to climb out of it, and they dragged that soldier inside. Everyone standing there was terrified. They could not imagine such a deadly alignment. The dying soldier let out a loud death cry, even being stunned. The zombies raised their eyes in his direction, listening to the swarming of newly discovered prey. Whether they will be distracted again or will enter the store in the same way as their relatives as a mystery. Zombies mercilessly rushed at the soldiers one by one. The men received bites, becoming infected with a post-mortem disease. A real chaos began to happen on the roof. Splashes of blood gushed from side to side, washed away every second by large drops of rain. The soldiers, not sparing themselves, sacrificed their lives to prevent the monsters from getting on the roof. Lin Yang understood that it was necessary to make a difficult decision immediately on which the lives of everyone who was here would depend. The smell of blood was about to spread over a long distance, and all that pile of zombies that was somewhere below would be here with them, which would not be the best outcome for his conspiracy. In the reflection on the metal surface of the knife, Lin Yang noticed zombies that were crawling onto the roof. He tried to warn the rest of the team about this, but forgot that he couldn't help but say a word, how it was all at the wrong time. Now, Lin Yang could only look at how unsuspecting people stood with their backs to their own death. which they could have prevented, they understood that Lin Yong was trying to tell them something, but they couldn't imagine what it was, surprisingly. The soldiers in the midst of the battle stood completely relaxed, apart from the fact that they did not try to help, and they themselves did not worry that they might become victims of an attack any minute. Finally, they turned around when the roars of monsters were heard right behind their head. Lin Yang attacked the zombie with determination, possessing high dexterity. He demolished the zombies from the roof without any problems with just a kick, without using any weapons. He took off the head of the next one with his weapon. He was terribly knocked out by creatures who decided to attack from behind. Whatever the fight is, it must be honest, it was one unbreakable rule, the bodies of. The enemies flew to the ground from the height of the second floor. The commander could not understand why the zombies were making noise and what his subordinates were doing at all. One of the soldiers pointed down at him in fright. They're not only ordinary zombies, but also mutants were already pulling up with shouts. The enemy was approaching from below. One had to stay, and the rest had to go to the next building by the stairs. All the soldiers accepted the order given to them. The guy who had already been infected volunteered to stay on the roof. The captain pressed his lips into a tight line and said that he would stay here with Lu, and the others needed to leave right now. The wound on the guy's body was rotting fast. He couldn't hold out for long. The captain asked Lin Yong to leave, saying he would cover for him. Everyone called him the Elder, as if they did not understand what responsibility this title carries with it. Lin Yong grabbed the injured guy by the arm and dragged him along. What kind of senior would he be if he acted differently? He used his nanks and covered the distance between the roofs in a split second with his other hand. He quickly moved the ladder further. The soldiers looked at what was happening in disbelief. They could not believe that people were capable of such a thing at all. Lin Yong still didn't understand what they were looking at, because if he didn't leave now, it would be too late. The captain ordered everyone to go down and run urgently. Otherwise, they would have been devoured by zombies. The soldiers shouted in chorus, "Yes," and went on the soldier. Lin Yang was carrying thanked him for his help. It was possible to run in such clothes. The clothes stuck unpleasantly to the body, restricting movement. The soldier stood at attention and addressed the captain. The guy volunteered to stay there for a distraction. While he was still conscious, Lin Yong was very surprised by such a noble act on the part of a soldier. The faces of everyone present visibly darkened. Lightning flashes ominously illuminated them, and yet the soldier was insanely determined in his choice to sacrifice. The captain shouted to the whole roof the words that everyone obeys the order, and therefore Liu Bing remains on the roof, and the others follow right behind him. Rush and complete the task. The tragedy of what was happening was reinforced by the rain. The soldiers, like in a Disney cartoon, stood with their heads bowed while Naughty Drops knocked on there. Helmets, privately being himself with tears in his eyes, swore to fulfill the task without fail. Thus the squad moved on, leaving the guide a certain death which he was ready to accept with pride and purity in his heart. A private with a roar jumped from the roof into a crowd of zombies, giving himself up to be torn to pieces. He was not ready to give up so easily. The guy resisted firing at the ranks of monsters one by one. However, the podrons had to end sooner or later. The guy stared at all this lot of zombies, and his eyes filled with tears again. The private reached out with his trembling fingers to the grenades that hung on his belt like a damn burden. It was worth it to take so many monsters to the grave, and therefore Liu Bing blew himself up right there, saving the lives of all his comrades, who had already become the real family that was lost with the beginning of the infection. The blast wave of heat enveloped the fleeing soldiers. The captain kept urging his subordinates, saying that things of this kind should not be repeated. Lin Yong was horrified by how real these NPCs were. Their tears and blood were just like those of the living, being very close to the hospital in a small building that painfully resembled that shop the soldiers rested after their journey and tried to cope with the surging emotions, the captain was sitting at one of the walls, trying to contact the base with a diot. However, those simply did not have reserves for reinforcement. They had not yet managed to get to the hospital, but they had already lost several of their guys. They could not be saved, which means it was absolutely stupid to expect a good job and a successful completion of the mission from them. Lin Yong was sitting on the floor and kept looking in the captain's direction. His condition reminded the guy of a nervous breakdown. And it seems that once again, they had another unexpected problem, which should have had great consequences. The captain turned to them with an expression of utter psychosis on his face, and there was a solid something waiting for them outside the window. Another mutant zombie so big and fat that the little arms and legs that he had could not support this carcass. And all the soldiers were ordered to check their weapons and prepare for another battle. They looked already insanely tired and dissatisfied with what was happening. Lin Yong flexed his neck, realizing that another big battle was waiting for them, which could not be avoided. His head was pierced by a sensation associated with the ability, the first for death, meanwhile the mutant. Outside, the window was aiming a passenger car directly at the building where they were hiding. Now the soldiers were shocked again. In just a few days, they had to go through something that many would not have been able to withstand. Their hearts were broken by the deaths of their comrades and the need to fight from time to time. A large mutant, looking like an ugly caterpillar, launched a passenger car at a distance of 100 meters long. Lin Yang could only be shocked to look at all this and clap her eyes behind her glasses. Bien, who appeared not so long ago, shouted for the soldiers to run. Because they had already been noticed, a captain ordered his subordinates to climb the hill and shoot at the limbs. Making their way outside, they risked a lot, because the fragments of the building, being large boulders of stones, flew away with terrible speed, crashing right into them. The captain simply could not figure out how to protect his people, because in such an environment, there was always a risk, and not a small one. The machines that were located on the ground were burning because of such manipulations carried out by a mutant. Vegan frowned as he watched the whole scene. He was worried that Lin Yang had no weapons with him at all to defend himself in case. Of anything, Ian had not yet managed to survive the deaths of his comrades, and therefore behaved extremely restlessly. In this regard, the guy turned to his friend with another question. But Lin Yang was already gone, and he, and again, felt the same awkwardness that arose every time Lin Yang did something equally unexpected. The soldier stared in disbelief at the note that was attached to his vest on the side. In it, Lin Yang offered to strike on the head so that they could kill him, and he thought of lowering his head to the ground, where his friend was already racing towards the monster at full speed. He really was crazy. Lin Yong decided to restrict the movement of zombies in close combat. In order to give Ian the opportunity to shoot in the head, he should at least try. The system window immediately laid out the whole background on the mutant. He was called a giant advance, considered Lin Yang as an enemy. But the level of danger was not particularly different from all those whom the guy had met before. Its magnitude was indeed the most terrifying. However, the power was insanely high. It was 300 points, while Lin Yang had only 24. Of course, all this was compensated by dexterity points, which have never failed the guy, yet Lin Yang shot into the air at high speed, ending up right in front of the monster's face. Climbing up the huge arm, he struck a blow to the temple. But the mutant did not even move, although the damage was quite severe. A gunshot shell flew right over Lin Yang's ear. He managed to jump away in horror at the last second, so that his head would not be blown off right on the spot. The shells flew one after another, while Lin Yang irritably jumped off the mutant. It seemed that they decided to kill him too. It knew that it needed to protect its head, and therefore fell to the ground, covering it with its hands. It seemed that this mutant had a sense of self-preservation, and self-defense. It was something amazing and at the same time terribly interfering with the plan. However, someone's shell survived the fallow deer and crunched through the temple. The Yan, to whom this blow belonged, rejoiced and smiled. Even Lin Yang created the efforts of his comrade. The guy jumped on the zombie again to finish it off. But as it turned out, only his hand was injured. There was nothing wrong with the skull. This mutant was too big. The bullet passing through his arm only weakened his strength. The mutant roared, and Lin Yang rolled straight to the ground. His stamina expanded much faster than the monster. The guy landed in a trash can, hitting his coccyx painfully. I was glad that it wasn't a fracture. The difference in their strength was too great. Lin Yang was worried that he would have to use Devourer skills because there was no other way. The soldiers kept aiming at the monster's head. But now, the captain also ordered everyone to dodge, which means he was preparing to use weapons much more dangerous than before. The first assault club was ordered to report the situation, but current events prevented this quite strongly. However, the reports still occurred. The first and second groups remained without losses. The captain exhaled, asking the fighters to continue to be careful. Lin Yong, standing in the middle of the madness that was happening, he urgently needed to shift the monster's attention to himself so as not to bring an end to the squads. For several of the same mutant attacks, he kept throwing cars like pebbles in the yard. Lin Yong activated the captain's skill, which immediately expended 5 points of his stamina. Lin Yang told the monster to obey by raising his hand. The swallow skill was activated. Stamina decreased by another 3 points. With every second, she was falling and falling, making the guy nervous. Finally, the zombie got out from under the shackles of the skill and was furious. He didn't like what was happening to him at all. He pounced on Lin Yang, not giving him the opportunity to go anywhere. Finally, the Devourer's skill was activated, and the zombie's hands were covered with bones. The guy soared into the air and cut off the mutant's limb in one fell swoop, forcing him to beat in pain. The Devourer could be deadly, and not they would have had to rely on the cannon anyway. The soldiers decided to immediately confuse the monster with a concentrated attack. They began to shoot continuously at those without giving time for a break, continued to distract the mutant and attract his attention. He willingly played the game, and eventually the guy fell into the clutches of the monster, which even came as a surprise to him. For sure, everything happened because of the decreased stamina, but it didn't even bring pleasure like that. The Yan looked at all this in bewilderment. He believed that Lin Yang had run quite deliberately and now did not understand anything about what was happening here. But still the soldier raised the cannon and shot at the monster's head. And Ian did not understand at all the tricks that Lin Yang threw out from time to time. Finally, the mutant's head was pierced, and he was deprived of his left eye. Lin Yang fell out of his palms and landed on the ground once again, and the mutant collapsed in front of him with a crash. However, the system prompt did not appear in the air, which means the creature was alive. So why was the shot not fatal for him? A dozen cannons were pointed at Lin Yong, who continued to sit on the ground, looking shocked behind the backs of the military. They demanded an answer about what kind of person or being he was. But Lin Yang was in no condition to answer the questions presented to him. He kept looking at the giant spiders crawling out of the mutant's head. The guy pointed in the direction of the monster so that the soldiers turned around because he had not died yet. But they were too interested in the person of the zombie in front of them. The soldiers kept talking now that they were not denying Lin Yang help, but if he did not confess now, then they would not be able to feel calm. Lin Yang stood up and rolled his eyes. He had to do everything himself. And the game also prevented him from speaking calmly. The soldiers became even more embittered and ordered him not to approach. But Lin Yang didn't need them either. The The guy again made an attempt to take off his mask, but the same voice as the previous time informed him that they would never find out about it. Lin Yang stared in front of him in horror. The mutant behind the soldiers rose to his feet, surrounded by an eerie scarlet aura. The spiders continued to advance. The captain ordered his men to retreat, firing back at the evil creatures. Those in turn began to eat the servicemen. Lin Yang had no choice but to run his stamina. It wouldn't even be enough to save himself, let alone the others. And the End could not understand what had happened in such a short time and how he could even unclench with so many enemies. Lin Yang continued to run in the opposite direction. The system gave Lin Yang a message that the black spiders in front of him were a mutant race. Players cannot acquire all the skills and characteristics of this race. With the gluttony skill, the race of insect mounts has a certain difference from ordinary zombies. This difference the players had to explore on their own. Lin Yang had expected to encounter only a big man. After all, he had counted on strength for that. But now it seemed like some kind of symbiosis, which he definitely did not expect. Lin Yang guessed that the giant zombie was simply being manipulated and the real overlord was a maggot. Then this mutant seemed to be able to resurrect indefinitely. Lin Yang turned around at the strange sound and realized that it was not the time for him to slow down, so he rushed on quickly, climbing the stairs to Ian. He was sitting at the very top. The guy asked what the situation was downstairs. Lin Yang handed him a note, asking him to get out of the rain first. Then the zombie shared his guesses that the body of this mutant is full of bugs. They had a symbiosis. When a body is in danger, spiders crawl out to protect it. Insects are the main overlord, and the End should not have left the game, because otherwise the next time he comes in, he will be here again alone with a huge zombie. But Yan did not understand what exactly they should do now, because there were no NPCs left. Lin Yang looked at the grenades hidden on his chest and realized that there was only one way left. He had a plan again and again should have helped him, but the guy was clearly not happy about this prospect. The rain continued to pour, and Lin Yang pondered. He realized that spiders were much more dangerous than zombies, which he wrote down in his negotiation notebook. Lin Yang was giving instructions to Yan in an insanely serious tone, making him more and more perplexed. Lin Yang went downstairs to put on everything and decided once these spiders not only did not attack zombies, but also allowed themselves elves to be eaten. The mutant grew noticeably. His limbs became longer, and he began to seem much less helpless. He even managed to grow his blown-up head back, which was not so easy. The spiders also laid eggs to resume harmony in a symbiotic relationship. Lin Yang copied the low-level swallow skill. The mutants suddenly began to devour the spiders at a much faster rate than they would have time to lay eggs. The prey itself was heading to the hunter. It remained only to accept it with pleasure. Lin Yang rushed into the thick of the spiders, not letting them pounce on him because of the high speed he devoured one after another. No matter how disgusting it was, they turned sour and caused vomiting. It made my teeth ache from how disgusting it was. You can't even give that to a dog. Lin Yang was sorry that it was impossible to add zero to all this horror. Now his stamina was once again filled with 36 points. Lin Yang himself was terribly surprised, because everything turned out even better than expected. The skill should have been active for almost 3 more minutes. Lin Yang ran towards the mutant, provoking him. In a few jumps, he was at the neck of the monster and cut it with a dagger. The mutant caught him and sent him straight down his big and insanely smelly throat. The swallow skill was activated right at the moment when Lin Yang was already in the stomach of the monster. He began to tear the walls of internal organs with his sharp limbs, literally killing the creature from the inside. The spikes were digging into his stomach, but this guy's blood was terribly viscous. Gigan was standing around the corner in horror. He could not figure out in any way what the beauty of the plan was, unless it was not in the meter of Lin Yang himself, but in the tracking of Eam. Now, it was time to do what Lin Yang had asked him to do, which was to blow up the insects When he put them in his mouth, Yan had previously said that he was taking care of his level and equipment, but Lin Yong's plans were always the craziest. But there was no time to doubt. He swung and threw a grenade towards the monster. It landed in front of his face and exploded with a characteristic boom, breaking even the nearest buildings. A system window appeared over Yan, which notified that the downpour had stopped and the aggressiveness of the zombies had decreased to a normal level. It was finally over a beautiful rainbow, lit up the sky, but the picture located on the ground did not match it. In any way, pieces of flesh were scattered everywhere, and the smell from them was appropriate. And Yan ran to the remains of the carcass to look for Lin Yong. During these few days, he managed to get attached to him and did not want to lose such a good and intelligent ally. Ian was shocked when he saw him calmly getting up from under the carcass. Lin Yong himself had a system window above his head, which reported that he had killed the lord of this territory. Now this area could become his, and whether he wanted to expand the territory, Lin Yong was glad that he had finally heard the system that he had missed so much for the first time. Finally, he was safe. He almost ripped his stomach open, worried that it was over. The yin furrowed his brows and put his hands on his hips. He began to scold Lin Yong because the tactics he used were too crazy, because it was just a game. The system window reported that the player and Yan offered him to unite. Lin Yong wrote him a note saying that he would definitely pay more attention next time, and Ian continued his speech, saying that Lin Yong cannot be trusted, and now first of all, Lin Yong should have accepted the offer, so that next time Ian could resurrect next to him, and Yan had suspected from the very beginning that Lin Yong was crazy and uncooperative, and Yen needed to go and rest. He advised Lin Yong not to stay too long, so as not to spoil his health. Lin Yong waved goodbye to him kindly. He really was very grateful to him, because only thanks to his help he was able to escape. The volume of blood was rapidly increasing, and therefore Lin Yong needed to find a safe place to restore energy. Lin Yong continued to calmly cut the flesh from the deceased mutant. The guy's head was spinning insanely while he climbed to the second floor of the building. Apparently it was once a residential building. The atmosphere, in comparison with the former shelters, was much more cozy. 2 windows under which there was a sofa next to it, an already collapsed bedside table, a rotting lamp at the wall that was located on the left. There was a chair and another pedestal. The light did not work, but nevertheless was not needed in such an environment. There was no way he could attract attention. The system window reappeared above Lin Yong, which indicated that his health had reached a critical state. Lin Yang cleared his throat. Feeling his lungs burn, he could only heal after the upgrade. There were still 10 hours to wait. Before evolution, of course, the feeling was not pleasant, but it required coming to oneself through suffering such a long time before evolution was probably caused by the fact that the experience was given too easily. It remained only to patch himself eating a relative, but he had already absorbed the Overlord twice and couldn't do that 20 units have. Being added to health, the inability to quit the game was killing him slowly. But surely player Lin Yong received a passive, slow recovery skill, which made him very surprised. He could speed up his recovery rate by eating meat. The unexpected ability was amazing, of course, only 5%, but it was already something the 7 previous subjects had helped him a lot. Lin Yong hoped that this one too. If he had gone on a mission now 6, he would certainly have thrown away his skates. He should have recovered from his wounds as soon as possible. And Lin Yong fell into a deep sleep.